Settle in with me now, as we draw the lamp a little lower and let the night fold softly around us. You and I are about to step back, far back, into a world that is at once unfamiliar and surprisingly close. Tonight, we wander toward Olympia, the sacred ground where the ancient Olympic Games began. You might think of them as contests of strength, sweat, and shouting crowds, but here's the quiet twist. The earliest games were not created for sport alone. They were woven into prayer, into ritual, into offerings of peace. At their heart, the Olympics were closer to a festival of sleep and song than the roaring spectacle you might imagine. And so, as we walk together, the echoes of that hidden gentleness begin to rise. The air is warm, fragrant with wild herbs and olive trees, and though the games would gather men from rival city-states, they came under a sacred truce. For a short time, wars and conflicts paused, not out of weakness, but out of reverence. Imagine the relief in that, a lull in battles, a hush across valleys. So athletes, poets, and priests could meet without fear. This is the part many forget. The games were a peace agreement before they were competition. It is like finding a quiet heartbeat hidden under what you thought was only noise. As we step through this introduction together, stay close. In a moment, you'll see how even the most ordinary details, like the smell of bread baking in the villages near Olympia, or the shimmer of torches lighting the path to the temple, can tell us more than the medals or the records. History is most alive in these small textures. And as you breathe slowly now, imagine walking barefoot on the dusty path leading to the sanctuary, your senses open, your pace unhurried. Every few hundred words, let me gently remind you to stay with me. This isn't a sprint, but a stroll, much like the athletes who arrived days before the contest even began. They would bathe, pray, and live communally in simple huts, their lives woven with preparation and reflection. You can almost hear the soft murmur of voices at dusk, the crackle of a small fire, the clink of amphory as wine is poured sparingly, not for indulgence, but for ritual. Doesn't it feel surprising, even tender, that the greatest gathering of strength began in such quiet ways? Now picture this. Before the races, before the wrestling and the discus, came procession, not a parade of loud celebration, but a solemn walk to the temple of Zeus. Laurel leaves brushed against the athlete's shoulders, incense smoke curled into the air, and priests intoned prayers. This was not the sound of cheering. It was the hush of reverence. If you had stood there, you would have felt it, the weight of time slowing, the unity of thousands breathing as one. That moment alone was worth traveling days, even weeks, to experience. And here lies another curiosity loop I will gently close for you. Did you know the athletes swore an oath before a statue of Zeus? They promised fair play, respect, and devotion to the gods. It was less about victory than about honor. They touched sacred offerings, pledging themselves not just to the games, but to something greater, the fragile trust of peace. That oath is what truly bound the Olympics together, more than any finish line. Stay with me. Imagine the valley around Olympia in those days. The nights were warm, yet softened by the rustle of leaves and distant chirp of crickets. Families camped in groves, their laughter mellowed by the firelight. Children dozed against their parents, lulled by the low notes of all-lost flutes drifting through the air. Poets recited verses under stars, their voices like a second kind of competition, gentler but no less powerful. The games were never only about muscles. They were about memory, music, and the sacred pause that let humans see one another as companions rather than enemies. You might find yourself breathing more deeply now, as though part of you is already resting on that ancient ground. And you are safe here, as those athletes were safe for the span of the truce. The ground beneath your imagined feet is cool, the air tinged with the smoke of torches, and the stories of centuries are whispering to you through the stones. What we often call history is not distant. It is a lantern glowing faintly, waiting for us to notice. The gentle twist continues. Victories were not marked by gold or riches, but by a wreath of olive leaves, cut from a sacred tree said to be planted by Heracles himself. Such a prize seems small, almost fragile, doesn't it? But in that fragility lies its meaning. The wreath was perishable, fleeting, and yet its symbolism lasted far beyond any treasure. It taught that honor is not in what you hold, but in how you are remembered, in how gently you carried yourself in competition. in peace, and in community. As you breathe, think of how that connects to your own life. Sometimes the most lasting things are the simplest. A smile of kindness, a promise kept. In this way, the ancient Olympics remind us of our own small, sacred odes, the things we hold quietly but dearly. We are close now to where this hook will leave you, standing at the threshold of the first true chapter. Already, I hope you feel what I feel, that the Olympics were not the noise of clashing bodies, but the hush of shared reverence. They were less about spectacle and more about stillness. And in our story together, we will explore each layer. The torchlight rituals, the village meals, the slow rhythm of processions, the gentle pride of athletes returning home. Stay with me. In a moment, we will step through the gates of Olympia itself, where every stone, every torch, every breath was part of something larger. For now, let this thought rest with you. The Olympics began not in the roar of a crowd, but in the silence of prayer. And in that silence, you and I will begin chapter 1 together. The air is soft tonight, as though the world has placed a quiet hand upon your shoulder, guiding you gently into the past. You and I are walking together, step by step, along a path lined with olive trees. Their leaves catch the faint shimmer of moonlight, silver on one side, shadowed green on the other, as if whispering in both voices at once. I tell you to breathe slowly, to notice how even the smallest rustle of branches feels like part of a larger rhythm, and to know that you are safe here, unhurried, wandering without weight. The past is not rushing us. It waits for us as patiently as the stones of an ancient stadium. And tonight, we will begin to sit with those stones, listening to their story. And yet, here is the gentle twist. When people think of the ancient Olympics, they often picture roaring crowds, clashing athletes, or perhaps the stern glare of judges. But in truth, the earliest Olympic Games were not loud at all. They began in silence, with no competitions, no cheering throngs, but with offerings left in the stillness of a sacred grove. The Games were once more about devotion than about victory, more about presence than about performance. That quiet beginning is hidden beneath centuries of retellings. Yet if we pause here together, we can hear it. Stay with me, for in a few moments you'll see how the games that would one day shake the Greek world started with little more than the sound of sandals brushing soil and the smell of smoke curling from a single fire. So let's turn the lamp a little lower in our minds and imagine that first grove at Olympia, long before marble columns or grand stadiums rose there. It was a simple space, defined not by buildings but by trees, the wild oaks and olives that grew naturally near the Alpheus River. The river's flow was steady, constant, a ribbon of water murmuring beneath the Greek sky. And into this grove came people who sought to honor Zeus, the great god whose presence they felt in the mountain thunder and the spark of lightning across the sky. No medals, no spectators. Only the hush of reverence, the weight of shared belief, and the sense that to walk upon that earth was to touch a sacred place. You might picture the early travelers who made their way there, some walking barefoot, some in simple leather sandals, carrying bread wrapped in cloth, jars of oil, or offerings of fruit. They walked not with the posture of athletes preparing for contest, but with the humility of worshippers. This was around the 8th century BCE, a time when Greece was still a scattered collection of city-states, each with its own customs, rivalries, and stories. Yet in this grove, those differences softened. People from distant places agreed on one thing. Here, every 4 years, they would set aside disputes and come together. A truce was declared, sacred and inviolable. It was called the ekakyria, a word meaning the holding of hands. Imagine that, before the games even existed as contests, there was first a decision to stop fighting. Isn't it gentle, in its way, that the very heart of the Olympics began with peace? As we linger in this thought, I want you to notice how your breath is moving, slowly, steadily, the way the river itself would have flowed. In a moment, we will walk further into this grove and find what it meant to them to dedicate time to Zeus. But for now, just know this. The games at their birth were closer to prayer than to sport. That is why the earliest records of Olympia speak of sacrifices, feasts, and the honoring of ancestors more than of foot races or wrestling. Now, if you close your eyes and let your mind drift, you can almost smell what that place would have been like. The smoke of burnt offerings rising into the sky had a heavy, earthy aroma, thick but not unpleasant. The air carried with the sweetness of figs, ripening under the summer sun, and the faint tang of oil poured over roasted grains. People sat together in small groups, sharing what they had carried, telling stories as twilight deepened. The stars came out above them, glittering in the deep black of the Greek night. For many who gathered, this was the largest assembly they had ever known, and yet the atmosphere was not one of frenzy. It was one of awe, of togetherness, of laying down arms and raising up voices in hymns. Stay with me here, because in a few steps more, something begins to change. Over time, the gathering that was once mostly sacrifice and feast started to carry another layer. As men came to Olympia, they began to ask, if we are already meeting, if we are already setting aside violence and rivalry for these sacred days, what if we channeled our strength in another way? What if, instead of fighting wars, we measured skill? What if, instead of wounds, we sought victories that harmed no one? And from that question, softly asked, the games began to take form. Picture a simple clearing, a stretch of flattened earth not yet bounded by stadium seats, where young men lined up to run. They were barefoot, their muscles lean, their expressions calm. At the start, no bronze trumpets announced them, no announcers shouted. Only the steady gaze of priests and the quiet presence of the grove bore witness. When they began to run, it was not the pounding thunder of a modern race, but the rhythm of feet striking earth, breath flowing in and out, the same as your breath now. A race of 192 meters, called the Stadion, gave its name to the place and to the very idea of the stadium. But here in its infancy, it was simply a run, performed in the sky, in honor of a god. I imagine the spectators, few at first, sitting on grassy slopes or leaning against tree trunks, murmuring to one another in the flickering half-light of oil lamps. They were not there to be entertained in the way we think of it. They were there to witness something sacred, to see bodies in motion as an offering itself. Movement was devotion. The act of running was a kind of prayer. Isn't it a wonder that what we now call sport was once almost indistinguishable from worship? Let's pause for a breath here. You are safe, unhurried, wrapped in the calm knowledge that even thousands of years ago, humans sought peace and ritual through gathering. In a moment, we will follow the games as they grow more complex. But notice how even their foundation was built on silence, reverence, and stillness. That is a gentle twist most people forget. The Olympics began in quiet, and so, through the centuries that followed, each festival grew. New contests were added, first in running, then in wrestling, then in the throwing of discus and javelin, in long jumps that required not only strength but rhythm and grace. But the first chapter of their story, the one we are settling into tonight, is less about the competitions themselves than about the mood of the place. Olympia was not a city with walls or markets. It was a sanctuary. To go, there was to step out of ordinary life, to breathe more deeply, to feel time slow. I like to think of the pilgrims who arrived from all corners of Greece. Some may have been farmers, hands rough with soil, carrying baskets of barley. Some may have been poets, murmuring verses under their breath. Some may have been children, eyes wide with wonder at the sheer size of the gathering. They all walked the same paths, passed beneath the same trees, and drank from the same river. And when they stood together in the grove, they felt something larger than themselves, something binding. Stay with me, because here is another secret the stones of Olympia whisper. Even as the games became known across the Greek world, their essence remained rooted in peace. No wars were to be fought during the sacred truce. Armies laid down their weapons. Messengers traveled freely, bearing the announcement of the games. And for a time, perhaps the only time in that turbulent age, the Greek world could imagine itself not as divided city-states, but as one people gathered under the same sky. As night deepens in our telling, I want you to imagine lying back on the grassy slope beside the stadium, your head cradled in your hands, hearing the low murmur of conversation around you. The stars will overhead, timeless and silent. Someone nearby hums a hymn, the notes drifting like smoke into the cool night. You close your eyes, but the sound of the river is steady, the breath of earth itself. This is what the first games would have felt like. Less a spectacle than a sanctuary, less noise and communion. And that is where I leave you for now, in the hush of Olympia's earliest nights, so you may drift deeper into the story. When we continue in the next chapter, we'll walk together into the rituals that open the games, the sacrifices of the great altar, and the way the people believe the favor of Zeus watched over every contest. But for tonight's gentle step, let us rest in the grove, beneath olive leaves that shimmer like silver coins in moonlight, knowing the games began not with battle cries, but with peace, silence, and a shared breath. When you and I return to Olympia now, we do not begin with the race or the cheers. Instead, we arrive at dawn when the mist still clings to the earth and the air feels cool against the skin. The grove is hushed, and before anything else, there is the matter of ritual. That is what gave the games their soul, more than the contests themselves. Without the sacred beginning, the running, the wrestling, the leaping, all of it would have been hollow. The games were, first and foremost, a ceremony, a prayer given shape. And so, if you and I wish to truly understand what it was like to stand in that place, we must walk with the ancient pilgrims into the sanctuary as the first fires were kindled. The heart of Olympia was not the stadium, but the altar. It was a great mound of ashes built up over centuries, the remains of countless sacrifices to Zeus. Every 4 years, the ash grew a little higher, a little wider, carrying in its gray dust the memory of generations. This altar was not carved of marble or polished stone. It was something more organic, more elemental, a living monument of fire and devotion. Pilgrims who traveled to Olympia would approach it quietly, sometimes kneeling, sometimes touching the earth before it, and they would place offerings there, animals for sacrifice, cakes of barley, libations of wine. To stand before that altar was to feel yourself in the presence of the divine, as though the god's gaze might be lingering just beyond the clouds. Stay with me here, because something gentle but surprising happened at those ceremonies. Many imagined them to be grim, a somber duty performed out of fear of the gods. But in Olympia, the offerings were full of life and celebration. There was music, soft flutes, the plucked notes of a lyre, and there was laughter as families prepared the feast that followed the rituals. The sacrifice was not seen as a loss, but as a sharing. What was burned on the altar went to the gods. What was cooked afterward was eaten by the people. The entire sanctuary filled with the smell of roasted meat and herbs, and the air was not heavy but joyful. Think of that. The first act of the Olympic festival was not silent alone, but a meal, a gathering, a moment of nourishment that connected heaven and earth. And, in a way, that is why the games endured. They were not only about testing the limits of the body, but about affirming community. The sacrifices at the altar bound everyone together, whether they were athletes or spectators, whether they came from Sparta or Athens, from Corinth or Elis. Here, all were welcome, because all were under Zeus's sky. That was the subtle but powerful magic of the Olympics, an unspoken reminder that before rivalries, before contests, there was fellowship. As you breathe slowly now, picture the procession that began the games. Priests in long robes carried vessels of sacred water, their steps steady, their expressions calm. Athletes followed, their bodies gleaming with oil, not yet tense for competition, but walking in rhythm with the music of pipes. Behind them came magistrates, heralds, and ordinary people, all moving toward the altar. The sun rose as they walked, casting long golden beams through the trees, until the whole sanctuary seemed lit from within. If you close your eyes, you can almost see it. The white smoke rising, the shimmer of bronze vessels, the rustle of linen garments, the quiet hum of anticipation that filled the air. Stay with me, because here is another hidden truth. The games were as much about oaths as they were about races. Every athlete who competed was required to swear a solemn vow before the statue of Zeus Horkios, Zeus the keeper of oaths. They placed their hands upon the sacrifice of a boar, and they swore they had trained honestly, that they would not cheat, and that they would respect the sacred truce. To lie in that moment was unthinkable, not only because of the watchful eyes of the priests, but because it was believed Zeus himself would punish oath-breakers. This detail matters, for it shows us that to the Greeks, sport was inseparable from honor. It was not enough to be strong or swift. You had to be truthful. Imagine the weight of that promise, whispered in the morning air, as each man bound himself not just to the games, but to the gods. And then, after the odes, the sacrifices and the hymns, the contest could finally begin. But even then, there was no abrupt burst of noise, no sudden roar. It was a gradual unfolding, like the petals of flower opening in the sun. The first competitions were usually the foot races, the stadium run, and the anticipation for these was quiet but electric. Families settled themselves on grassy embankments. Priests found their places near the starting line, and heralds lifted their voices, not shouting, but announcing in steady tones the names of those who would run. Pause here with me. Breathe slowly. Can you imagine what it felt like for the athletes in that moment? Their hearts must have been beating hard, their breaths steadying, their bare feet pressed against the packed earth. And yet, unlike the modern athlete surrounded by cameras and flashing lights, these runners stood in the silence of a grove, under the open sky, with only the gaze of gods and neighbors upon them. Every heartbeat, every footstep would echo into history. But they did not run for medals or for fame. They ran because running itself was an act of worship, an offering as sacred as the smoke on the altar. Now, let me tell you something gentle but essential. The Olympic festival was not only for men. While only men competed in the main games, women had their own festival at Olympia, known as the Heraia, in honor of Hera, the wife of Zeus. Young women ran races in the stadium, wearing short tunics that left one shoulder bare, their hair loose as they sprinted across the earth. These races were separate from the men's contests, but they were no less important. They too began with rituals, offerings, and odes, and they too carried the sense that movement itself could be holy. Isn't it calming to know that even in a world where roles were often divided, the impulse to honor the gods through motion belonged to everyone? And so the first day of the Olympics was not a frenzy of competition, but a slow layering of ceremonies, promises, and prayers. It was a weaving together of voices, footsteps, and offerings, until the sanctuary of Olympia felt like a tapestry of devotion. The contests themselves were only one thread in that tapestry. The real fabric of the games was community, bound by ritual, bound by peace. Stay with me for just a little longer. As twilight returned on that first day, the altar still smoldered with the ashes of sacrifice, and the grove filled once again with music. Families feasted, children laughed, poets recited verses, and old men told stories of past games. Oil lamps glowed in the dark, casting golden pools of light against the trunks of trees. And overhead, the stars returned, the same stars that had watched the first festival centuries before, the same stars that watch us now. It is easy to forget that the Olympics were not only about who was the fastest or strongest. They were about who could honor the gods, who could live up to their oath, who could celebrate peace in a world too often marked by war. This is why the rituals mattered, why they were the true beginning of every Olympic story. Without them, the games would have been only contests. With them, they became something enduring, something sacred. And so, as we close our eyes at the end of this chapter, imagine that you are lying near the altar itself, feeling the warmth of its embers as the night breeze stirs the leaves above. The air smells of wood smoke and roasted herbs. Somewhere nearby, a lyre plays softly, the notes drifting like a lullaby. You breathe deeply, slowly, and you know that you are part of something vast, ancient and timeless. The first day of the Olympics is ended, and tomorrow, the contest will begin in earnest. But tonight, there's only stillness, only peace, only the knowledge that the games were built not on noise but on reverence. If the first day of the Olympics was devoted to ritual, oaths, and sacrifice, then the second day brought with it the heartbeat of competition. The athletes, who had already walked in solemn procession, who had sworn their promises before Zeus, now stepped onto the earth not as worshippers alone, but as runners, wrestlers, and fighters of strength. And yet, what makes this day remarkable is not simply the contests themselves, but the way they unfolded, slowly, rhythmically, like verses in a hymn. You and I can imagine it. The stadium filling with spectators, not with roaring noise, but with a low hum of conversation. The sound of sandals pressing against earth as people found their places on the grassy slopes. Children climbed onto their father's shoulders for a better view, while older men, leaning on their staffs, settled themselves patiently, ready to watch as they had for decades. Women, though often seated apart, looked on from the edge of the sacred grove, their eyes as eager as the men's. The entire community gathered, and in that gathering, the games became more than sport. They became a mirror of life itself, in all its variety and vitality. The first contest to truly seize the day was the stadium race. It was the simplest event, a sprint the length of the stadium, about 200 yards, but it carried the weight of tradition. To win the stadium was to win the very crown of Olympia. For in the earliest games, this single race was the only contest. Even centuries later, when more events have been added, the stadium remained the heart. Herald would announce the runners' names, their cities of origin, and the crowd would murmur in recognition or surprise. And then there was silence, deep and reverent, as the runners crouched at the starting line. Stay with me here, because this silence was itself a kind of ritual. No one shouted, no one distracted. All eyes turned to the runners, their muscles coiled, their feet pressed into the packed earth. The start was given, not with a pistol or a flag, but with a word, a signal carried on the air. And suddenly the quiet burst into movement, not noise, not chaos, but the swift rhythm of feet pounding, arms pumping, bodies leaning forward in perfect alignment. It was over in moments, the victor breaking to the finish with breathless grace, his chest rising and falling as the crowd erupted into applause. And yet, there was no medal, no ribbon, no great ceremony at that moment. The true prize came later. For now, the runner simply raised his hands, or perhaps bowed his head, and his fellow competitors embraced him. There was a sense that victory belonged not only to the man, but to his polis, his city, and to the gods who had granted him strength. Imagine how it must have felt, to be held aloft by neighbors, to hear your name sung not in arrogance, but in celebration, to know that your stride had joined a line of runners stretching back generations. But the stadium was only the beginning. After the sprints came the longer races. The dialos, 2 lengths of the stadium, and the dalikos, a long-distance run that wound multiple times around the track. These races tested not only speed, but endurance. And they offered a different kind of beauty. Where the sprint was fire, fast, bright, fleeting, the long run was water, steady, flowing, patient. You can picture the runners circling again and again, their bodies glistening with sweat, their breath forming a rhythm as reliable as the waves. Spectators leaned forward, counting the laps, watching as men pushed past their limits, each step a quiet testament to perseverance. Stay close, because here lies a detail that often goes unnoticed. The athletes ran barefoot, their soles hardened by training, their bodies unprotected by armor or padding. And yet, their movements were graceful, almost serene. Running was not only about competing. It was a form of meditation, a way of aligning the body with the divine order. In this way, each stride was a prayer, each breath a hymn. The stadium, the dialos, the dalikos, these were not just races, but acts of devotion written across the earth. And then came the contest of strength, wrestling, boxing, and the pancration. Wrestling was perhaps the oldest and most respected. The athletes would anoint themselves with oil, then sprinkle fine sand upon their skin to give grip, and they would step into the ring. There were no weight classes, no divisions. It was one man against another, testing skill and endurance. The crowd watched not for violence, but for technique. The sudden twist of a wrist, the shift of a hip, the sweep of a leg that sent an opponent to the ground. Each fall was met with applause, not for humiliation, but for mastery. To throw a man 3 times was to win, and victory in wrestling was seen as a crown of wisdom as much as a strength. Boxing, by contrast, was more brutal, though still conducted with reverence. The fighters wrapped their hands in leather straps. Their knuckles hardened, and they faced one another under the open sky. There were no rounds, no time limits, no breaks. The contest continued until one man could fight no more. And yet, even here, there was respect. When a fighter yielded, raising a finger in submission, the match ended and the victor did not gloat. He bowed to the gods, to the crowd, and often helped his opponent to his feet. Imagine the stillness after such a bout. 2 men battered, breathing hard, yet standing side by side, united by what they had endured. And then there was a pancration, the all-power contest, a blend of wrestling and boxing, with almost no rules. It might sound harsh, but remember, for the Greeks, this was not cruelty. It was the ultimate test of body and mind. To watch the pancration was to witness balance, the balance between force and skill, between endurance and strategy. It was not the strongest who always won, but the one who could remain calm in the storm. Picture the crowd, leaning forward, not with bloodlust but with awe, as two men grappled under the summer sun. Their every move a study in human resilience. Now let us step back and breathe. All of these contests, all of these displays of speed, strength, and endurance were framed by something deeper. The idea that the body was a vessel for excellence, and excellence itself was a way of honoring the gods. Victory was never only personal. It was civic, spiritual, universal. The games taught that to train the body was to discipline the soul, and to test oneself in the stadium was to step closer to the divine. As night fell on the second day, the embers of the altar still glowed, and the victor sat among friends, not yet crowned but already honored in whispers and songs. The losers, too, were celebrated, for compete was itself a mark of courage. The air was filled with the smell of bread baking, meat roasting, wine being poured, and laughter rising into the night sky. And above it all, the stars looked down, as though they too were spectators in this grand, gentle contest of human striving. Stay with me as you breathe slowly now, because here is the quiet truth. The contests were never meant to divide. They were meant to unite. A man might run faster, wrestle harder, strike with more endurance, but in the end, every athlete was part of the same tapestry, woven together in the sanctuary of Olympia. That is why the games endured for centuries. That is why, even now, as we lie in the calm of our own night, we can still feel their rhythm echoing in our breath. The second day of the Olympics has ended. The stadium lies quiet, the athletes rest, the priests keep watch by the altar, and the grove returns to silence. And tomorrow, the spectacle will continue, not louder, not harsher, but unfolding with the same steady grace. The third morning of the Olympic festival dawned gently, with the mist still clinging to the sacred grove of Altus, and the voices of priests echoing softly through the marble colonnades. The air was cool, carrying the scent of laurel and cypress, and yet all knew that the day ahead would be one of intensity, not quiet ritual or swift foot races, but trials demanding strength beyond measure. This was the day of pentathlon, a contest both feared and admired, for it combined 5 events into one flowing symphony of skill, endurance, and grace. Imagine the athletes gathering at the edge of the stadium, their bodies glistening faintly from the oil applied in preparation, each of them knowing that the day would test not just their speed, but their versatility. For the pentathlon was no single pursuit. It demanded mastery of the stadium race, wrestling, the discus throw, the long jump, and the javelin. To win here was to be seen as the embodiment of arete, excellence, balance, harmony between body and spirit. The first event, the stadium sprint, was already familiar to the crowd. The runners crouched at the starting line, their feet pressing into grooves carved into stone centuries earlier, grooves polished smooth by countless sprints. The crowd hushed. A word was given, and the athletes sprang forward, the earth trembling faintly beneath the rhythm of their steps. The winner of this sprint gained not only applause but momentum. For in the pentathlon, victory was not measured by one triumph but by performance across all 5 trials. The discus followed, and here the air seemed to shimmer with anticipation. The discus was no small weight of metal or stone, but a carefully crafted circle, heavy enough to challenge, yet delicate in the arc of its flight. Each competitor stepped into the throwing circle, gripping the polished bronze, feeling its cold weight balance in the palm. With slow rotations of the body, the thrower built momentum, feet gliding softly on sand, until in a single sweeping motion, the discus was released. The crowd watched, silent for a heartbeat, as it spun glittering through the air before clattering onto the earth. It was less about sheer distance than about beauty, the elegance of the curve, the balance of strength and rhythm. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can imagine the metallic hum of that spin, like a whisper across time. Then came the long jump, unlike the modern version, for the Greeks leapt with small weights in their hands called halteres. These were swung forward to give momentum, then backward, then release at the perfect instant, guiding the jumper farther than his body alone could carry him. The sand pit was raked smooth, waiting to capture the mark of each leap. The jumpers inhaled deeply, swung the weights with precision, and launched themselves through the air. For a moment, they seemed suspended, floating like birds, before landing softly in the sand. Applause followed, Not thunderous, but warm, approving, like the patter of rain on clay rooftops. The javelin was next, a slender spear balanced in the hand, its throw aided by a thong of leather called an ankyle, looped around the shaft to give spin and distance. The athletes poised, their eyes fixed on the horizon, the sun glinting on bronze tips. Then, with a run and a swift release, the javelin cut through the air, flying straight and far, its arc like a stroke of ink across the sky. It landed in the earth with a muffled thud, and the crowd murmured appreciatively. Here, precision mattered as much as distance, and every successful throw seemed to stitch man to nature, the hand guiding the flight of wood and bronze as though it were a bird taking wing. Finally, there was wrestling, the trial that could decide it all. In the sanded ring, bodies grappled, muscles strained, feet dug deep into the earth. To throw an opponent 3 times was victory. But in the pentathlon, often the contest did not even need to reach that point. For by this stage, it was clear who had triumphed across the whole. The man who had run swiftly, thrown far, leapt gracefully, cast true, and wrestled with steady skill. He was crowned the victor, not yet with the olive wreath, but with the applause of thousands, with songs sung in his name, and with the silent approval of the gods whose altar burned nearby. Stay with me here, because what makes the pentathlon so enchanting is not just the contest itself, but what it represented. To the Greeks, the pentathlete was not merely strong or swift, but balanced. He was not the heaviest lifter, nor the fastest sprinter, nor the most cunning wrestler, but the man who could harmonize all these things. He became a living statue of Kalokagathia, beauty and goodness together. And so the pentathlon was often a favorite, the crown jewel of the Olympics, for in its victor the Greeks saw a vision of human perfection, framed by humility, framed by devotion to the divine. As the pentathlon drew to a close, the crowd, warmed by the sun, stretched their limbs, shared figs and bread, and recounted each leap, each throw, each fall in whispers and smiles. The priests tended the altar still, the smoke rising, the scent of sacrifice mingling with the earth. The victors would later be honored in procession, but for now, they rested, sitting in the shade of olive groves, drinking water from clay cups, their bodies tired but their spirits lifted. And while the pentathlon concluded, other contests awaited. Chariot races were whispered about, their thundering hooves soon to shake the valley. The crowd dispersed slowly, voices low, hearts content, their minds full of images. A discus spinning, a javelin flying, a body suspended midair in the grace of the jump. Breathe with me now, because in this moment, as the day turned golden, Olympia was more than a stadium, more than a shrine. It was a place where human striving became art, where sweat and muscle became poetry, and where the gods themselves might pause, listening, as mortals honor them not through blood or conquest, but through beauty and motion. And as the evening fell, the grove grew quiet, shadows stretched long, and the world seemed to sigh, as though in approval of what had been witnessed. The day after the pentathlon, Olympia stirred with a different kind of anticipation. The sun rose gently over the valley, painting the temples and colonnades in soft hues of rose and gold, and the air held the crisp coolness of morning. Priests walked slowly through the sacred altus, their robes brushing against the gravel, incense drifting upward like threads of mist. The hush of dawn was broken not by the rhythmic pounding of runners or the thud of discus against earth, but by the distant rumble of hooves. For today, the people gathered for one of the most dramatic spectacles of all, the chariot races. Imagine it now, my friend, the hippodrome, a vast racing ground stretching nearly a kilometer, its tracks wide enough for teams of horses to surge side by side. The crowd filled the long embankments, farmers and noblemen, merchants and poets, all pressing in, their voices low with excitement. The hippodrome lacked the marble grace of the temples, but it carried a raw grandeur, built for speed, danger, and daring. The track was marked by turning posts at each end, called Nisai, and it was here that the race would often be won or lost. The chariots themselves gleamed in the sunlight, light, fragile frames of wood, drawn by pairs or quartets of horses, their bronze fittings polished, their reins pulled taut. The horses stamped and snorted, their manes bound with ribbons, their breaths steaming faintly in the cool air. Charioteers, often not nobles themselves, but skilled professionals or slaves entrusted with the honor, stood tall and still in their carts, waiting for the moment of release. And then, as silence deepened, the signal was given. The barriers dropped. The horses leapt forward as though uncoiled springs, hoofs thundering, dust rising in cloud behind them. The chariots jolted and swayed, wheels rattling on packed earth, and the crowd erupted, not with frantic shouts, but with a rising hum of awe, voices blending like a tide. The race began. The sound of hooves was relentless, a pounding rhythm that echoed through the valley. At the first turn, danger lurked. Charioteers leaned hard, guiding their horses with subtle pulls on the reins, their bodies tense, their eyes fixed on the curve. Some clipped too close, wheels scraping against stone posts, while others swung wide, losing ground but gaining safety. Crashes were not rare, chariots splintering, horses stumbling, but the crowd never cheered misfortune. Instead, they murmured with sympathy, then quickly returned their eyes to those still thundering forward. Stay with me now, because this race was more than sport. To the Greeks, the chariot contest was tied to myth itself. They remembered the story of Pelops, who, legend said, had won both a kingdom and a bride by triumphing in a deadly chariot race. Olympia, after all, was sacred to Pelops, whose shrine lay not far from the track. Every race echoed that tale, a reenactment of daring, risk, and divine favor. And so, in each turn, in each surge of hooves, there was not only the thrill of competition, but the whisper of ancient legend binding past the present. Lap after lap, the horses flew, their flanks darkened with sweat, their mouths foaming as the charioteers urged them onward. Dust coated the spectators, yet none moved away. The final lap brought the loudest swell of voices, a rising wave that carried the racers to the finish. With a last burst of speed, the leading team surged ahead, hooves striking sparks from stone, wheels spinning so fast they blurred. And then it was done. The victor stood tall in his chariot, raising the reins high, his horses trembling, their sides heaving. The crowd roared approval. Hands lifted, laurel branches waved in the air. But here is a twist, one that often surprises those hearing the tale for the first time. The glory of victory did not belong to the charioteer, no matter how skillful his hands, no matter how steady his courage. The true victor was the owner of the horses. He might be a nobleman or a wealthy patron or even a woman, for in this event, unlike most, women could claim victory. The charioteer was celebrated, yes, but the wreath of wild olive would be awarded to the one whose wealth and resources had made the triumph possible. And so, even queens, from time to time, were honored at Olympia, their names remembered for the excellence of their stables. This curious custom reveals something deeper about the games, doesn't it? That victory was not always about the body alone, but about the harmony of resources, training, and vision. For while the stadion and the pentathlon crowned those who embodied balance and grace, the hippodrome celebrated another truth, that human achievement could be magnified through partnership, with horses, with skillful drivers, with the quiet discipline of preparation. After the races ended, the dust settled slowly. Spectators stretched, brushing grit from their tunics, sharing stories of near collisions and graceful turns. The charioteers led their horses to water troughs, stroking their damp necks, murmuring soothing words. And somewhere beyond the track, priests prepared to honor Pelops once more, for every victory was also an offering to him, the mythical charioteer who had once defied death itself. As evening crept across Olympia, the hippodrome lay quiet, its surface scarred with deep wheel ruts, the scent of dust still heavy in the air. A child might walk across it now, running fingers along the grooves, imagining himself guiding a team of horses, feeling the rush of wind, the thrill of the crowd. And above all, the valley exhaled, a great hush falling once more, as though even the earth needed a rest after such thunder. And you, listening here with me, can imagine the scene softening into twilight. The shadows lengthen, the temple columns glow in fading light, and the day's roar dwindles to silence. Sleep, too, is like this, the afterglow of effort, the quiet after the storm of energy. So let the chariots fade, let the dust settle, and let your thoughts drift gently, like horses walking slowly home after their race. The morning of the sixth day in Olympia unfolded differently than the roaring days before. The sounds of racing hooves and panting athletes were replaced with a kind of reverent hush, a quietness that spread over the valley like a soft cloth laid upon the earth. People woke slowly, voices low, footsteps gentler than usual, as though they instinctively knew that this was not a day for sport but for solemnity. This was the day of sacrifice. At the center of Olympia, the great temple of Zeus stood tall, its massive columns rising into the sky, carved in pale stone that caught the light of the early sun. Birds circled lazily overhead, their wings cutting slow arcs in the still air. The temple's presence dominated everything. It was here, within its shadow, that the most sacred ritual of the games would unfold, a ceremony that bound together athletes, priests, and spectators, reminding everyone that the contests were not merely for glory, but for the gods. Imagine yourself there, standing among the gathered crowd. The air carries the scent of laurel and incense, mingled with the sharper tang of smoke from altars already kindled. Priests move through the assembly in long, flowing robes, their faces calm, their hands steady. They carry vessels of water drawn from the sacred Alpheus River, their surfaces catching the light like liquid silver. They carry barley grains in shallow bowls, simple offerings, yet heavy with meaning. Stay with me here, because this day offers a soft revelation about the games. While much is remembered for speed and strength, the heart of Olympia was always devotion. The athletes swore oaths before Zeus himself, promising fair competition, pledging their honesty. Even kings and generals stood barefoot before the altar, humbling themselves under the gaze of the divine. What began as contests of body were anchored always in the unseen bonds between mortal and God. The procession begins. At its head walked the priests of Zeus, followed by officials bearing olive branches and sacred relics. Behind them come the athletes, their bodies marked by dust and sweat from previous contests, yet they walk slowly, heads bowed, the weight of ritual resting upon them. And behind them, the great mass of spectators, farmers who had traveled for days, merchants with their families, women carrying children on their hips. No one is excluded from this moment. The games, for all their exclusivity in sport, belong to all in worship. At the altar of Zeus, massive and ancient, the rituals begin. This altar was not like the carved stone blocks of temples, but a great mound built from centuries of ashes. For each sacrifice left its mark, layer upon layer. Imagine the surface, dark and grainy, yet sacred. Priests sprinkle barley grains, pour libations of wine, and then comes the sacrifice itself. A bull is led forward, adorned with ribbons and garlands, its horns glistening with gold leaf. Musicians play soft flutes, their notes weaving through the air like threads, calming the animal, calming the people. And when the moment arrives, the bull is offered, smoke rising high into the sky, carried with it prayers for victory, for health, for favor. Now here is something curious, a gentle twist of the story. While we often imagine these sacrifices as grim or harsh, the Greeks themselves saw them differently. For them, it was not the death of the animal that mattered most, but the sharing of the feast afterward. The gods received the smoke, the essence, the first portion. The people received the meat, roasted and divided among them. And so the sacrifice was less about loss and more about unity, about a community joined in a meal that bound them together and to the divine. Can you picture it? The smell of roasting meat fills the valley, mingling with the fragrance of pine and laurel. Families gather in circles, sharing bread, wine, and laughter. Children play at the edges, tossing sticks and stones like little discus throwers. Athletes sit side by side with strangers, eating with calloused hands, their bodies still sore yet their spirits lightened. It is a festival, a great dinner beneath the sky, and everyone, no matter their station, shares in the same meal. In a moment, I'll show you why this matters, but let us linger here a little longer. The statue of Zeus inside the temple, one of the wonders of the ancient world, shines dimly in the firelight as evening comes. Imagine the god seated upon his throne, made of ivory and gold, so tall that his head nearly brushed the ceiling. In his hand he holds Nike, the goddess of victory, small and delicate, like a promise kept close. His gaze is serene, not fierce, as though he sees the efforts of mortals not with judgment but with patience. The athletes who look upon him feel both humbled and strengthened, reminded that their feats are only shadows of divine endurance. The day stretches into night. Lamps are lit, their flames flickering gently in the warm air. The sound of conversation fills the dark, low and soothing, like waves on a distant shore. Some drift into songs, soft hymns carried by voices blending in the dusk. The sacrifices are over, but their spirit lingers, infusing the valley with a sense of calm unity, as though all present, Greeks from distant Polis, rivals in war and politics, are briefly one family under the stars. And now, here is the meaning promised earlier. The sacrifices, the feasting, the gathering in sacred space. These were not just traditions, they were the true foundation of the games. Without them, the running, the wrestling, the racing would have been only contests of men. But with them, every race became an offering, every victory a gift returned to the gods. The athletes competed not only for crowns of olive, but for the honor of being worthy in the eyes of Zeus. And in that shared devotion, the divisions between city-states softened. Even for a few days, enemies could lay aside their quarrels, bound by the sacred truce that made the Olympics possible. As night deepens, the fires burn lower. The great temple looms against the starry sky, its columns glowing faintly in the lamplight, its presence both immense and gentle. You can almost hear the quiet breathing of the crowd as they settle into sleep, bellies full, hearts ease, their minds softened by ritual and food. Somewhere a lyre is played, its strings plucked lazily, the notes floating like drifting feathers. And somewhere else, a child curls against his mother's side, lulled not by stories of races or strength, but by the comfortable longing of being part of something larger than himself. And you, here now, can let that same sense of belonging settle upon you. Feel yourself part of that ancient crowd, the firelight warming your skin, the smell of pine smoke and roasting meat drifting through the air. Let the murmurs fade to a hush, let the stars shine steadily above, and know that you are safe within the circle of calm. For tomorrow, contests will begin again, and voices will rise once more in shouts and cheers. But tonight, there is only rest and reverence and peace. The seventh day of the games dawns with gentleness that belies the excitement waiting ahead. There is a cool mist that clings to the olive groves, wrapping trunks and branches in a soft veil. The air is damp, and the earth feels cool underfoot. Birds begin their calls more hesitantly than usual, as though sensing that something special is about to unfold. The festival of sacrifice is behind us, and now the energy of Olympia shifts back toward competition. Yet, this day holds a different kind of anticipation. It is the day of the chariot races. Few spectacles in the ancient world match the thrill of horses charging down the hippodrome. Yet here, too, as in all things Olympic, there was ritual, ceremony, and a sense of something greater than mere speed. Imagine the vast track, an elongated oval carved into ground, dust packed firm by countless hooves. The hippodrome is wide enough to hold the pounding of dozens of horses abreast, and long enough that their gallop sounds like distant thunder rolling through the valley. But before the race begins, the crowd gathers slowly. People filter in from their camps, carrying baskets of figs, bread, and olives. Children sit on their fathers' shoulders, their eyes wide with expectation. Merchants call softly, selling roasted nuts and honey cakes. The morning sun lifts the mist, unveiling the scale of the stadium, and already the air buzzes with voices, though hushed compared to the roar that will come later. Let's turn the lamp a little lower and imagine yourself among them. You find a place along the bank, close enough to see the chariots as they line up. Each team consists of a charioteer and his horses, usually 2, sometimes 4, depending on the wealth of the competitor. The charioteers wear short tunics, their hands wrapped in leather straps to hold the reins. Their eyes are sharp, focused not only on their horses but on the turns ahead, for the corners of the track are the most dangerous. Many a race has been lost, and many a chariot overturned, in those sharp bends. And here is a quiet twist. Though the athletes themselves ran, wrestled, and boxed for their own glory, the charioteers were often not competing for themselves at all. Many were servants, riding on behalf of wealthy patrons or noble houses. Victory did not belong to the one who risked his body in the chariot, but to the one who owned the horses. In this, the games remind us of the layers of ancient life. Even in glory, hierarchy remained. Yet still, the charioteer, though unnamed in the records, held the hearts of the crowd. His courage, his steadiness, his skill in guiding the team, these were what made the race alive. The signal is given. Trumpets sound, clear and long, cutting through the chatter. A hush falls, and then the gates swing open. Hooves strike the earth in unison, a drumbeat of thunder and dust. The chariots surge forward, wheels rattling, reins snapping taut. The crowd erupts, voices rising like a wave, though even their cries cannot drown the sound of the race itself. The air fills with dust, golden in the sunlight, swirling around horses and men as they press ahead. Stay with me as we ride through the scene. You can almost feel the vibration under your feet. The weighty earth trembles as the horses fly past. You see the determination in the faces of the charioteers, the strain of the horses' muscles, their nostrils flaring as they push forward. The corners approach, treacherous and tight. Some charioteers pull hard on the reins, steadying their teams with precision. Others push recklessly, trying to overtake in the bend. And sometimes, just sometimes, the wheels catch, the axle strains, and the chariot tumbles. Gasps ripple through the crowd, then silence, as all eyes follow the fate of the fallen. Yet in many cases, the men rise, bruised but alive, and the race thunders on without pause. Now, here's the gentle revelation promised. The chariot race was more than speed and spectacle. It was a test of harmony. Horses and man, wood and wheel, courage and caution, all had to move in perfect balance. A single heartbeat out of rhythm could mean disaster. And in that balance, the Greeks saw a reflection of the cosmos itself, where order and chaos danced together. Victory was not brute force, but alignment. The laps continue, dust rising higher, sweat glistening on horse and man alike. The crowd cheers louder now, voices rough with excitement. They shout names of cities, of patrons, of horses known for their strength. Some pray aloud to Poseidon, god of horses in the sea, asking his favor for their chosen. Others simply clap, hands striking together in time with the pounding hooves. And when the final lap approaches, the noise becomes a storm, filling the valley, echoing off the hills. The winning chariot surges ahead, its horses straining, the charioteer leaning forward as though urging them with his whole being. And then, with a final burst, they cross the line. The race is over. The crowd exhales, cheers breaking into laughter, applause, and songs. Children imitate the racers with sticks and rope, running in circles, their feet scattering dust. Families gather again with food, retelling the turns of race, praising the daring, marveling at the speed. The winning patron will receive the olive crown, but the memory belongs to everyone. The thunder of hooves, the sight of courage, the thrill of the contest. As the dust settles, a quiet returns. The horses are led away, sweat-darkened hides gleaming in the afternoon sun. The charioteers step down, some limping, some smiling faintly. Attendants bathe the horses, wash their wounds, whisper soft words to calm their trembling bodies. And once more, Olympia becomes a place not only of contest, but of care. Evening approaches. Lamps are lit again, their glow soft and golden. The crowd disperses, drifting back to camps and inns, voices mellow now, weariness seeping in after the day's exhilaration. The hippodrome lies quiet, the marks of hooves and wheels etched into the earth like scars of glory. Overhead, the stars emerge one by one, steady and timeless, as though they, too, have watched the race and now return to their silent vigil. And you, here with me, can rest as the athletes rest, as the horses rest. The day's thunder fades, replaced by a deeper calm, a calm that speaks of cycles, of striving, of release, of effort met with ease. The seventh day closes, not with rivalry, but with a shared awe of what human hands and animal strength can achieve together. The eighth day begins not with thunderous hooves or the clash of men grappling, but with something quieter, though no less stirring. It is a day of poetry, of recitations, of music and memory. Olympia was not only a place where bodies proved their strength, but where minds and voices revealed their craft. The games were not only athletic, they were cultural, too, woven deeply with art, thought, and the love of story. In the hush of early morning, when mist drapes the groves in silver, poets gather near the altars and porticos, their scrolls tucked into their robes, their hearts steady with words that have been waiting for this moment. You can picture it. A small crowd gathering, less restless than those who thronged the stadium, more contemplative, perhaps even hushed by the weight of what they are about to hear. Families who had cheered wildly the day before now leaned forward, their voices softened, ready to let their ears rather than their eyes carry them into wonder. And then, one by one, poets step forward. Their voices rise into the cool air, carrying verses that honor gods and heroes, but also the victories of athletes who had just run their races or wrestled with sweat and skill. Here's the gentle twist. These performances were not secondary. They were essential, for the stories told in verse preserve what the eye might forget. The race ends, the dust settles, the sweat dries, but in poetry, the moment lives on. To the Greeks, an athlete's glory was not complete until a poet gave it wings and words. This truth lingers, doesn't it? Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see why the poets were considered, in their own way, athletes of memory. Imagine the sound of the lyre. Strings plucked gently, a soft counterpoint to the rhythm of recitation. The poet sings of Heracles, founder of the games, or of Zeus whose altar gleams with sacrifice. He tells of past champions, their names resonating across generations. He describes the olive wreath placed upon the victor's head, not as a simple crown, but as a symbol of eternal honor. The crowd breathes slowly, deeply, as though each word carries them further into a dream of the past and a hope for the future. Every 300 or so words, let's turn the lamp lower in our imagination. Feel the warmth of its glow on parchment and stone. Listen to the cadence of lines, how each syllable falls like a footstep on a path that stretches from the ancient world to ours. In this way, poetry binds the present moment to the eternal, much like the games themselves. Some poets speak of love, others of struggle. Some honor not gods or heroes, but the land itself, the rivers that nourish, the mountains that guard, the olive trees that shade. To hear such words was to feel part of something vast and tender. And in this, Olympia became more than sport. It became a festival of life itself, each poem a thread tying humanity to the divine. Children sit with wide eyes, not restless here but lulled, as though listening to a bedtime story under the stars. Their parents rest their hands gently on their shoulders, keeping them close, reminding them that these words are worth holding. And when applause comes, it is not the roar of the stadium, but a ripple of claps, soft and respectful, a sound that lingers like rain tapping on roof tiles. Here's another quiet revelation. It was through poetry that the Olympic spirit survived when memories faded. Athletes' names may have been lost to the dust of centuries, but verses traveled, repeated, sung, remembered. Even now, what we know of some games survives because poets preserved them. Without words, the torch of memory would have gone out. With them, it still glows, like a lamp carried from one night into another. Later in the day, musicians take their turn. Pipes and flutes, lyres and voices weave together. Their music is not grand and overwhelming, but fluid, flowing like the Alpheus River nearby. It wraps around listeners, guiding them gently inward. Close your eyes and hear it. Notes rising and falling, carrying tales without words, melodies that echo the rhythm of running feet or the steady beat of an oar on water. The games live here, too, in sound and song, in memory shaped not by vision but by vibration. As the sun climbs high, shadows shorten and the air warms. The poets withdraw, their scrolls tucked once more into robes, their voices spent but glowing. Listeners disperse quietly, their hearts full, their steps slower now, as if reluctant to break the spell. In the sanctuaries and camps, conversations drift back to athletics, to races yet to come, but beneath it all lingers a hum of verse and song. Even those who came for contests alone cannot escape the charm of words well spoken. Evening comes, and lamps flicker in the gathering dark. Families gather near their tents, and some repeat aloud the lines they heard that day, savoring them like sweet figs. A child may try to mimic a rhythm, giggling before sleep pulls them under. In the hush, poetry weaves its final spell, joining the stars above to the soft earth below. And so the eighth day closes not with thunder or sweat, but with whispers, with a lullaby of memory preserved. And as you lie back now, listening, you can feel the same softness. You can sense the power of words to carry time, to keep flame alive. The games continue tomorrow with fresh contests, but tonight, you rest with verse in your ear music in your heart, and the calm of knowing that what matters most is never lost. The ninth day dawns with a sense of anticipation. The air cooler than before, the faint scent of olive smoke drifting from the altars. You feel as though you've been walking through Olympia long enough to know its rhythms. The rush of races, the steady pulse of rituals, the quiet echo of poetry. But today the tempo changes once again. This is the day when stories take form not in bodies racing nor in voices reciting, but in the hands of artists, the chisels of sculptors, and the brushes of painters. It is Art's Day, though in truth art has been everywhere from the beginning, woven into the very heart of the games. You might picture the stadium filled only with runners or wrestlers, but look closer. The shields gleam with engravings. The temples shimmer with painted friezes. The vases exchanged as prizes carry scenes of gods and heroes. The twist, and stay with me here, is that art at Olympia was not decoration. It was testimony. Every stroke of paint, every groove carved into marble, every small figurine left as an offering was a way to remember, to give permanence to fleeting triumphs. Races ended in moments, but images stretched those moments into eternity. Walk with me slowly to the workshops near the sanctuary, where sculptors and artisans have gathered. The sound is softer than cheers, chisels tapping, brushes whispering against clay. Young apprentices sweep dust from the ground, while masters work with calm precision, their hands steady despite the heat. They carve not only gods but the athletes themselves, capturing a moment of motion frozen forever. A runner mid-stride, a discus poised to fly, a wrestler leaning into his opponent, all preserved in bronze or marble, so that even when names fade, gestures remain. Every 300 words or so, let's pause and take a breath. Imagine leaning against a cool stone column, the shade soothing against your skin. Listen not only with your ears, but with your imagination. Each hammer's tap is a heartbeat of memory. Each painted line on a vase is a whisper from the past, saying, "Remember this. Do not let it fade." Nearby, potters turn clay with a rhythm as old as time. The vessels they create are not only useful, they are canvases. Onto them, artists paint chariots racing, boxers with fists wrapped, gods descending to watch their mortal children. These vases will travel far beyond Olympia, carried back to distant cities, spreading stories of the games to those who never set foot near Zeus's altar. In this way, art becomes the first broadcast, sending images across miles, across generations. There's a kind of contest here, too, though no laurels are given. Artists strive quietly for excellence. Their reward not in olive crowns, but in endurance of their work. One sculptor may see a statue placed near the sanctuary, admired by countless pilgrims. Another's vase may become a treasured heirloom in a family far away. Their glory is subtle but lasting. And so, without fanfare, they join the ranks of Olympic victors. Do you see the gentle balance forming? The games are not only about who is fastest or strongest, but about who can hold beauty, who can shape meaning. Stay with me, because in a moment, we'll glimpse how art Olympia became almost as sacred as the sacrifices themselves. In the great temple of Zeus once stood a statue that would later be known as one of the wonders of the world. Though built centuries after the first games, its presence speaks to art's role in this place. Crafted by the sculptor Phidias, Zeus sat enthroned, his form vast and serene, a figure of gold and ivory gleaming in the soft temple light. Pilgrims traveled great distances not only to watch athletes, but to stand before that statue, to feel small and safe beneath its gaze. Think of the quiet awe such an image must have inspired. Even the wreaths, the simple olive crowns, had artistry woven into them. Each was carefully braided by hands that knew the sacred groves well. Each leaf selected with reverence. The crown was ephemeral. It would wither with time. But in poems and in carvings, the image of crowned victor would endure, green and fresh long after the leaves had fallen. As the night day turns to evening, light softens on carved stone and fired clay. Artworks gleam with the last rays of sun, as if holding on to daylight for just a moment longer. Families walk slowly among the displays, pointing gently, murmuring in tones hushed by reverence. A child tugs at a parent's robe, eyes wide at a painted scene of Heracles lifting the heavens. The parent smiles, whispering a story to match the image. And so, art does its quiet work again, teaching, remembering, binding one heart to another. When night comes, fires flicker across Olympia. In the glow, statues seem almost alive, shadows dancing across their forms. Vases shine, their images pulsing like dreams. Around them, people lie down to rest, safe in the knowledge that what they have seen today will not vanish with sleep. The chisels tap, the brushes stroke, the poet's line, all combine to make memory secure. And as you settle now, you too carry those images. A runner forever mid-stride, a god forever watching, a reef forever green. They are with you, soft and steady, like the rhythm of your breath. Tomorrow, the games will continue with contests of strength once more. But tonight, you lie among artists, their whispers etched into stone, into clay, into time itself. The 10th day in Olympia brings a weight of anticipation, not just in the air but in the ground beneath your feet. The soil here has been pressed by countless footsteps, pilgrims and athletes, priests and artisans, all converging on the sacred valley where contests shape memory. But today, your path bends toward the heaviest, most enduring of contests, the feats of strength that test the body in its rawest form. If before you have seen races as swift whispers, art as delicate echoes, and rituals as flowing prayers, now you will see the games in their densest, earthiest form. You move slowly through the crowd, the air warm with the mingled scents of sweat, olive oil, and smoldering incense from the altars. The stadium hums differently now, a deeper tone, as if everyone's breath is lowered into the chest. It is not the sharp cry of a sprinter's start, but the solid silence before a stone is lifted, before two wrestlers grapple, before a discus arcs through sky. Stay close to me, because what we will see today is both primal and surprisingly refined, as if strength itself were not only brawn, but a form of artistry. The first contest that catches your gaze is wrestling. Two men step into the sanded ring, their bodies glistening with oil to keep skin from tearing in the grasp. They move carefully at first, circling like shadows, each waiting for the other to lean too far, to lose balance. Then, with a sudden motion, one grips, another twists, and together they tumble, limbs entwined, dust rising gently. There is no cruelty in this contest, only skill, endurance, and patience. The crowd does not roar wildly. It sighs, exhales in unison, impressed by each shift of momentum. You can almost feel the sand between your toes, soft yet firm, grounding each moment of strain. Just beyond, another contest begins. The Pancration, a blend of wrestling and boxing, a test of nearly all the body can endure. Here, the rules are few, the demands great. Yet even this, which might seem brutal, carries its own rhythm. Fighters move with caution, gauging, circling, striking only when sure. There is danger, yes, but not chaos. Discipline tempers every strike. To watch is to witness the edge where the human body meets its limits, where breath and strength dance together in survival. But stay with me, because soon we will step away from this intensity into something quieter, though no less powerful. A discus is lifted, round and heavy, cool bronze gleaming in sunlight. The athlete breathes deeply, twisting, winding like a spring. In that slow rotation, you can sense his world narrowing to a single line of release. Then, with sudden grace, the discus flies, carving through sky with a silence that makes the crowd lean forward, as if holding its breath. The disc lands with a thud, marking distance, a small victory etched into earth. The simplicity of it, lift, turn, release, belies the precision required. And in that precision, you realize strength is never brute alone. It is rhythm, control, the quiet mastery of balance. Every 300 words or so, let's pause, breathe. Imagine you're sitting in the shaded edge of the stadium, the air cooler under the canopy of pine. A breeze stirs, carrying the faint scent of figs drying on a nearby stall. Your body relaxes even as others strain, because here the gift is not only to watch but to absorb, to let the rhythm of contest soothe rather than excite. This is history for sleep. After all, a slow current carrying you gently forward. The shot put, though different in form, echoes the same theme. Stones are hefted, pressed against shoulders, then hurled outward with every fiber of muscle straining. And yet, in those arcs of stone, there is beauty too, not in the distance alone, but in the gesture, the curved back, the arm unfurling, the momentary stillness as the stone leaves a hand and sails. For a brief second, time holds its breath, the body's effort becoming sculpture in motion. Then there's a long jump, performed not with silent legs alone, but aided by small weights swung in rhythm to propel the body farther. Strange, perhaps, to you, but effective. The jumper clutches those weights, leaps forward, legs stretched, arms outstretched. Sand scatters as he lands. The audience murmurs. It is a contest of flight, of pushing the body beyond ordinary bounds. To watch it is to be reminded of the endless human desire to lift off, to taste the sky, even for a second. Stay with me a little longer, because there is one more test of strength, quieter yet no less profound. It is not about lifting stones or grappling in dust, but about enduring heat fatigue in the length of the day. The endurance of the crowd itself, gathered hour after hour, becomes its own silent contest. Children doze against their parents' knees. Elders lean on staffs. Merchants wait patiently with cool water or olives to sell. All of them endure, because to witness strength is to draw a little of it into oneself. When the contests end, when victors are crowned with wreaths of olive, something unexpected happens. The wrestlers, bruised but smiling, clasp hands in mutual respect. The discus throwers, the rivals, share quiet words of encouragement. The long jumper walks alongside the shot putter, both weary, both honored, and you realize strength at Olympia was never about crushing others. It was about measuring oneself, about meeting limits with dignity. As twilight descends, torches are lit. Their flames shimmer against bronze muscles, gleam on olive crowns, dance across the carved reliefs of the temples. The stadium empties slowly, like sand running through an hourglass. Families carry the memory of strength with them, murmuring stories, retelling feats. And you, too, carry them now, not as shouts, not as frenzy, but as steady rhythms of human endurance. Lie back for a moment in your imagination. The ground beneath you is warm from the day, the sky above sprinkled with stars. Around you, the sounds of Olympia soften, footsteps fading, laughter dimming, night insects beginning their songs. The weight of the contest lingers, but gently, like a comforting blanket. Tomorrow will bring new stories, new voices. Tonight, strength has already been shown, and you need only rest in its echo. Morning arrives slowly in Olympia, as though even the sun lingers a little, waiting for the smoke from the altars to rise and the dew to fade from the grass before beginning the day's events. You've walked through many contests already and seen strength, speed, and artistry, but now you will encounter something different. Today belongs not to the body alone, but to the spirit of competition wrapped in honor. You will see the oaths renewed, the ceremonies of fairness, and the subtle but powerful rituals that ensured the games were more than sport. They were sacred. As you step toward the sanctuary, you notice the athletes gathered not in the stadium, but in front of Zeus's great temple. Their bodies gleam with oil, yet this is no warm-up. Instead, they stand still, heads bowed, hands raised. Before them rests a slab of stone, and upon it, the pieces of a boar sacrificed earlier. Here they will take their solemn oath. They swear by Zeus himself that they have trained honestly, that they will compete without cheating, that they will respect the games. The twist, soft and unexpected, is that even in a world where contests could be fierce, the core was not rivalry but reverence. To cheat was not merely to break a rule, but to dishonor the god who watched. Stay with me here, because what happens next may surprise you. Officials, called the Hellenodikai, stand nearby, their robes plain but their authority immense. They are judges, yet they are also guardians of fairness. They observe carefully, not with cruelty but with calm presence. They walk among the athletes, guiding them, reminding them of rules. In some cases, when rules were broken, punishments were delivered, not with anger, but with quiet insistence on integrity. Even penalties, like fines, could become offerings, their money used to build statues of Zeus that reminded future athletes to uphold fairness. Imagine that, discipline transformed into art, into lasting memory, rather than into shame. Every 300 words, I invite you to pause. Breathe slowly. Picture the cool marble beneath your fingertips as you trail your hand along the temple steps. Hear the hush of voices speaking oaths in tones that ripple like distant waves. Let the atmosphere soak into you, safe, sacred, steady. The ceremonies continue. Priests lead animals to sacrifice, smoke curling upward in soft spirals, carrying prayers with it. The athletes stand in silence, each aware that this ritual binds them all together. Victors and those who would lose, strangers and rivals, all united in a common vow. It is less about winning, more about belonging. That was the heart of Olympia. The sense that every man who stood here, crowned or not, was part of something larger than himself. And yet, woven into this reverence, there are whispers of human weakness. You may ask, did men still cheat? Did they still try to find advantage where none should be? The answer, gently, is yes. Humanity has always leaned towards shortcuts. But when they were caught, their shame was not shouted but immortalized. Zanes, statues of Zeus, were placed along the pathways, paid for by the fines of those who cheated. Their bases bore inscriptions reminding all who walked by. Fairness is sacred, honesty required. Think of the quiet power of that, not humiliation, but reminder. Every new generation of athletes saw those statues, read those lines, and knew the weight of their vow. Further along, you pass through the altar, the sacred grove, and see families laying small offerings before shrines. Mothers place wreaths of flowers. Fathers pour libations of wine. Children scatter handfuls of grain. These, too, are ceremonies of honor, simple yet profound. They remind us that victory is not the only prize. To stand in Olympia, to witness, to promise to uphold the games, is itself an honor. Stay with me, because in a moment we will see how the sense of honor shaped not just athletes, but entire cities. For when victors returned home, they carried more than olive crowns. They carried honor for their polis. A single win reflected glory on one city, elevating its reputation across Greece. And so, the oath sworn at Olympia was not only personal, it was civic. To cheat would dishonor not only yourself, but your homeland. Imagine the weight of that responsibility. And yet also the pride it carried. To walk back into one city with a wreath, to hear the cheers, to know that your training in fairness had upheld the dignity of your people. That was the true crown. As the day wanes and the ceremonies fade into the hum of evening, a calm stillness settles over Olympia. The altars are blackened with ash. The scent of sacrifice lingers like a faint echo of incense. Athletes retreat to their tents, not restless, but quiet, reflective. They know tomorrow will bring contests again, the roar of crowds, the strain of muscles. But tonight is about balance, about fairness, about the steady thread of honor that holds the games together. Picture this scene as you close your eyes. Statues standing in twilight, their marble faces calm, their inscriptions gentle reminders of integrity. The grove rustling with night breezes, leaves whispering like soft applause for vows kept. Fires flickering at the temple steps, casting halos of light on the athletes' bowed heads. And beneath it all, the certainty that fairness is not an accessory to the games, but their foundation. So, as you lie back in the quiet of imagination, breathe in that certainty. Know that in Olympia, honor was as real as the races, as solid as the discus, as enduring as the statues themselves. Tomorrow, contests will test strength once more. But tonight, it is your spirit that rests, wrapped in vows, carried on soft breezes of fairness and truth. The morning air in Olympia is softer than one might expect, touched with pale golden haze, as though the sun itself is reluctant to climb too high, preserving the calm of the sacred valley. By now you have walked through rituals of fairness and oaths of honor, yet today brings something different, something that carries both solemnity and celebration. Today, you will step into the presence of sacrifices and offerings, those ancient acts of giving that bound mortals to gods, athletes to ancestors, and the games themselves to something far greater than competition. At the heart of Olympia, the temple of Zeus towers, its columns vast, its pediments carved with stories of mythic struggles. And before it, smoke rises in curls, drifting upward as though the prayers tied to it ride on invisible strings toward the heavens. You notice how the animals chosen for sacrifice, cattle, sheep, and goats, are adorned with ribbons, their horns polished, their bodies washed. They are led gently, not as if to doom, but as if to a sacred honor, for being chosen meant joining the gods. The plot twist you may not expect is that sacrifice was not an act of cruelty as often imagined in modern minds, but of communion. The meat did not go to waste. It was shared in great feasts, binding community together. To give to Zeus was also to nourish one another. Stay with me here, because this detail matters. Picture the altar of Zeus, so immense that it seemed more mountain than monument, built not of marble, but of accumulated ash from centuries of burnt thighs of animals, layered and pressed by time until it stood tall, gray, and monumental. Imagine placing your hand on its surface, warm, powdery, ancient, every sacrifice added to its height, making the altar itself a living record of offerings across generations. That altar was not silent. It whispered a continuity of countless prayers carried on smoke. Officials, priests, and musicians move among the worshippers. The priests sprinkle barley grains. The musicians play flutes in low, steady tones that drift like lullabies. Then the knife is raised, but gently, swiftly, the act completed with dignity. A portion of the animal, usually the thigh bones wrapped in fat, is burned for the gods, sending fragrance skyward. The rest is roasted, shared among athletes, judges, and visitors. A feast follows, not rowdy but reverent, for eating together was itself a sacred act. Can you see it? Rows of men seated on long benches, firelight flickering on their faces, bread and meat passed hand to hand, the murmur of conversation rising like gentle waves. Pause here and breathe. Imagine the scent of roasted meat mingling with wood smoke, the flicker of fire reflecting on bronze vessels, the sound of wind brushing the branches of sacred olive trees. You are safe in this moment, watching, listening, held in an atmosphere both grounded and divine. And sacrifices were not only of animals. Small offerings filled the sanctuaries too. Jars of oil, bronze tripods, figurines of warriors, bowls of terracotta, all placed at shrines in thanks for victories, in hope for future favor, or in memory of those who came before. Some of the most moving offerings were weapons laid down by soldiers returning from war, their sharp edges dulled by time, surrendered to Zeus as a gesture of peace. Imagine how it must have felt to lay down a spear on sacred ground, to replace conflict with harmony, to choose to give rather than to take. Stay with me, because a question lingers here. Why sacrifice at all? Why give up something precious? The answer rests in a simple truth. The act of giving creates connection. For the Greeks, it linked human to divine, mortal life to immortal presence. To give was to acknowledge one's place in the universe, to step into balance. And in that balance, the games thrived. Without these offerings, contests would have been empty struggles. With them, each race and wrestle carried the weight of the sacred. As night falls, the greatest of sacrifices takes place, the hecatomb. Imagine it. 100 oxen led to the altar of Zeus. Torches blaze, drums thrum softly, voices chant. When the smoke rises from so many offerings, the valley is filled with scent, with sound, with awe. It is not noise, but a deep hum, like the earth itself exhaling. The meat, roasted, is shared among thousands. Strangers become companions. The games, so vast in scale, are unified not just by competition, but by meal, by the breaking of bread, and meet in common spirit. Picture yourself now, sitting among them, a clay cup of wine in your hand, warm bread torn beside you, laughter low and unhurried around the fire. You lean back, watching sparks fly upward toward the stars. The air is soft, the night alive with a sense of belonging. And in that moment you realize, this, too, is victory, not crowns or applause, but communion, the quiet triumph of being part of something larger. And so the sacrifices shape not only the games, but the hearts of those within them. They teach patience, generosity, humility. They remind every athlete and every spectator that glory fades, but connection endures. Tomorrow the races will thunder again, but tonight the sacred fire steadies, warming both body and spirit. Let that warmth surround you now. Feel it in your chest, in your breath, in the stillness around you. The altar of ash still stands in your imagination, glowing faintly under moonlight, whispering of countless offerings, countless nights like this one. You are part of that lineage, carried softly across time, linked by ritual, by gift, by the gentle act of giving and receiving. As sleep gathers near, hold on to that image. Smoke curling toward stars, 100 fires burning in harmony, and the sense that even in the oldest of rituals, there was always kindness at the center. In the next chapter, we'll walk together to witness how victors receive their crowns, not with boasting, but with humility. For now, rest in the glow of offerings shared, of communion kept. The night has quieted, but the echoes of sacrifice and shared feast still linger in the valley. You feel the warmth of the embers fading, leaving behind a glow in your chest. The stars above Olympia seem brighter now, scattered like droplets of silver upon black velvet. Tomorrow holds a different kind of ceremony, not the smoke of offerings or the scent of roasted meat, but the simple and profound act of crowning the victors. This chapter carries us there, into the sacred heart of recognition, where triumph is softened by humility and victory becomes more than a personal achievement. Imagine the morning light spilling gently over the stadium, the olive trees casting long, thin shadows across the sacred ground. The air is hushed, as though everyone gathered knows they are about to witness something more enduring than the contest themselves. Athletes, weary yet glowing with pride, gather in small groups. Their bodies carry the marks of exertion, scratches from wrestling, dust from the track, the sheen of sweat that lingers even after washing. Yet their eyes are steady, their breaths calm. Each one is given their best, some finding glory, others finding only the lesson of struggle. Both are honored. Stay with me, because here comes a twist you may not expect. The victors receive no gold, no silver, no medals fashioned of precious metal. Their prize is a crown, just a wreath, woven from the leaves of the wild olive tree that grows in the sacred grove of Olympia. No weighty treasure, no costly gem. And yet, this crown carried more meaning than riches ever could, for it was believed that the tree itself had been planted by Heracles, the great hero, making its branches sacred, to where its leaves was to be touched by the lineage of gods. The ceremony unfolds with graceful simplicity. The judges, dressed in their robes of purple, stand tall as the victors approach. Each name is called aloud, not with fanfare but with solemn dignity. Imagine hearing your own name echo across the sacred grounds, carried by voices into the air, your heart swelling not with pride but with gratitude. The herald leads you to the altar, and a young boy, chosen for his purity, cuts the branches of the wild olive with a golden knife. The wreath is woven there, and then, fresh, fragrant, glistening with dew as the morning is early. Pause here and breathe. Picture the moment the wreath touches the victor's brow. The crowd murmurs, not with frenzy but with reverence. There is applause, yes, but it is not wild. It is steady, respectful, acknowledging that this crown represents discipline, endurance, honor. You may feel a shiver run down your arms just imagining it, not from noise or spectacle, but from the quiet weight of tradition. The victor does not strut or boast. He bows his head, receiving the wreath as a servant of the gods, not as a conqueror of men. He knows the olive crown will wither within days. Its fragility is a lesson. Glory is fleeting, but virtue, humility, and memory endure. Stay with me, because this is the heart of the story. The crown is not a possession to keep forever, but a symbol that lives in the spirit of those who witnessed it. And yet, the victor does not go home empty-handed. Upon his return to his city, he is celebrated. Gates are open for him, banquets held, statues perhaps commissioned. Some cities even granted victors lifelong privileges, meals at public expense, places of honor at festivals, relief from certain civic duties. But even then, the crown of olive remained the purest symbol, greater than wealth, because it was shared across all of Greece. It linked victor to victor, city to city, generation to generation. Let's turn the lamp lower now, and picture the victor's procession. As they move through Olympia, the crowned athletes are surrounded by friends, trainers, and fellow competitors. Their rivals walk beside them, not in bitterness but in respect. For even those who did not win carry honor in having tested their limits. The air is filled with the mingled sounds of flute music and soft cheering, the smell of laurel and olive leaves, and the warmth of the sun resting gently on bare shoulders. Here is something else to hold in your mind. The wreath is woven from a tree that still lives, rooted deep in the sacred grove. Every victor touches a living tradition, not a cut gem. Every wreath is different, unique to its moment, but all are born of the same tree. Can you feel the poetry in that? The reminder that we all share the same roots, even when our lives take different forms. And then there are the quiet moments after the ceremony. The victor sits in the shade, wreath still fresh on his brow, drinking cool water, perhaps speaking softly with his trainer. The crowd disperses. The dust settles. For a little while, time seems to pause, the crown heavy not in weight but in meaning. The victor gazes at the olive grove, at the altar of Zeus, at the stadium now empty, and realizes he has become part of something eternal. His name will be recorded, his memory preserved, not because of riches, but because he endured, he competed fairly, and he gave his all. Stay close now, because here's the deeper twist. The crown is not just for the victor. It is, in a way, for everyone. For his family who supported him, for his polis who trained him, for the gods who blessed him, and even for his rivals who sharpened his skill. It is shared glory woven into shared leaves. To watch another crowned is also to be crowned in spirit, to feel part of the same lineage of striving and striving again. As night returns, you can imagine the olive wreath resting on a victor's head under starlight, the leaves casting delicate shadows on his face. Perhaps he dreams not of triumph but a home, of walking familiar streets with the gentle pride of having honored both gods and people. The wreath will dry, its leaves crumbling, but the memory will not. In that fragility lies its power. It teaches that true victory is not in possessions, but in the stories and hearts we leave behind. And so you, too, can rest in that thought, that your quiet efforts, your steady steps, even your smallest triumphs are crowns of their own, fragile yet eternal. Let the image of an olive wreath settle softly in your mind, green and fragrant, a gift of the gods, a reminder that humility can make glory more luminous. Next, we will wander gently into festivals surrounding the games, the plays, the music, the poets who gather to share words as others shared strength. But for now, close your eyes and feel the cool leaves on your brow, the sacred olive tree stretching above, and the hush of a world that honors humility as much as triumph. The night has passed, and with the echoes of olive wreaths placed upon heads and the reverent applause of the crowd, a gentle quiet now hangs over Olympia. But in this stillness, another kind of celebration begins. The Olympics were never only about contests of speed and strength. They were also a meeting of minds, voices, and artistry. As the stadium rests and the dust settles on the track, the city becomes alive with festivals of words, music, and stories. It is here that poets, philosophers, and singers gathered, weaving their own crowns, not of olive leaves, but of song, wisdom, and verse. You might imagine the athletes retiring for a time, their bodies sore, their minds full of reflection. But all around them, in shaded porticos and beneath wide awnings, a different contest unfolds, one that requires not muscle but melody, not endurance but imagination. It may surprise you to know that the Olympics were also a stage for poets like Pindar, who sang of victories, and for philosophers who came to share ideas under the same sky where runners and wrestlers tested their bodies. The games became a festival of the whole human spirit, not just of the limbs and lungs, but of the mind and heart. Stay with me now, for here is the twist. The victors in athletics were immortalized not only by the wreath upon their brow, but also by words crafted in their honor. A city might commission an ode, carefully written and sung before an audience, so that the triumph lived beyond the day of competition. Imagine hearing your name carried not just by heralds, but by poetry, turned into a song that echoed across generations. The body would age, the wreath would wither, but words, softly sung, gently repeated, would endure. Picture the festival grounds. Long tables set with bread, figs, olives, and cheese. Clay cups filled with sweet diluted wine. Lyres being tuned as the first strains of music drift across the crowd. The air is filled not with a heavy muss of exertion, but with a lighter, playful scent of pine resin and incense. Families gather. Children tug at their mothers' robes. Traders bring their goods from faraway lands. And everywhere the murmur of voices rises and falls like a tide. And then the music begins. A poet stands, his cloak wrapped loosely around him, his voice strong yet soothing. He recites the story of a victor, not as mere praise, but as part of a greater tale. He links the athlete's triumph to the heritage of heroes, drawing lines from mortal sweat to divine blessing. His words carry you into the lives of Achilles, Heracles, and Odysseus, binding the present to the mythic past. And as he speaks, you realize the true festival is not one of individuals, but a connection between city and city, between past and present, between gods and mortals. Every few breaths, let me remind you, you are safe, unhurried, and welcomed here. These words flow like a soft river, meant not to excite, but to cradle your thoughts gently toward rest. In another corner of Olympia, philosophers gather in shaded groves. They do not debate loudly or with harsh tones. Instead, they muse together, asking questions that have no single answer. What is virtue? What is the purpose of striving? Is the crown of olive less or more than the crown of wisdom? These conversations are quiet but magnetic, drawing listeners closer. You can picture yourself sitting nearby, sipping water cooled in clay jars, nodding as the rhythm of thought itself becomes a kind of music. And then the singers. Their voices rise like flocks of birds at dawn, filling the air with hymns to Zeus, to Nike, the goddess of victory, and to the enduring beauty of the games themselves. Some play flutes, their high notes mingling with the rustling of leaves in the warm evening breeze. Others strum lyres, the strings resonating like gentle heartbeats. The crowd sways, smiles, and joins in refrains, their voices weaving into a single shared harmony. Pause here with me. Imagine the glow of torches flickering across faces, the warmth of communal joy, the hush that follows the end of a song, when silence itself becomes sacred. Isn't it comforting to know that long before our time, people too gathered not only to compete, but to listen, to sing, to rest together in beauty? The poets are not forgotten. Even today, their words survive, carrying the faint echoes of those festivals. When Pindar wrote his odes, he was not simply recording a victory. He was layering it with meaning, saying that the achievement of one person could reflect the honor of an entire city, even the favor of the gods. His verses were like garlands woven in ink, each line a leaf upon the crown of memory. But the festivals were not only lofty, they were also full of small, ordinary joys. Vendors selling honey cakes to children, potters displaying their newest wares, travelers exchanging news from distant cities. A family from Thebes might share figs with a traveler from Sparta. A boy from Athens might listen, wide-eyed, to the tales of a wandering storyteller who had seen the coast of Asia Minor. Olympia became, for a short time, not just a place of contest, but a village of peace, where all differences were set aside. Stay close now, because here lies another soft revelation. The Olympics, for all their grandeur, were not just about the strongest or swiftest. They were about the whole community, about gathering in one place to affirm that life is not only toil, not only strife, but also song, laughter, and the quiet binding of people together. The poets, philosophers, and musicians were as essential as the runners and wrestlers, for they gave meaning to the victories and reminded everyone that the human spirit is many-sided. As the evening deepens, imagine lying beneath a tree, listening to distant flutes, the voices of poets carried on the breeze, the flicker of torches painting golden strokes across the dark. The games themselves might be remembered for contests, but in the hush of night, it is the music and poetry that linger. A wrestler's crown may crumble, but a song about his courage might last for centuries. That is its own kind of immortality. And so, as this chapter closes, you can rest in the thought that glory takes many forms, some worn upon the brow, others whispered in verse, others still felt in the simple touch of shared song. The Olympics were never just a competition. They were a festival of humanity itself, where art and athleticism met under the same stars. In the next chapter, we will wander deeper into Olympia at night, where fires burn low, storytellers gather children at their feet, and the spirit of myth mingles with the quiet sounds of rest. But for now, let your thoughts drift like poetry into sleep, carried softly by the memory of voices rising in harmony across the ancient festival grounds. The moon has climbed higher, silvering the stones of Olympia and softening the shadows of colonnades and groves. The torches that once blazed brightly for the poets and singers now burn lower, their flames flickering lazily as if even fire has grown drowsy. Around the sacred grounds, the air carries the gentle weight of night. Families are withdrawn to their tents, and victors lie with their wreaths beside them, dreaming of parades awaiting their return. Yet, for those who wander quietly through Olympia after dark, Another kind of wonder unfolds, a tapestry of myths told by voices softened by firelight. It is in these hours when the games rest that stories come alive. Children curl against their mothers, their eyelids heavy, while their fathers lean close to hear tales from traveling storytellers. The rustle of robes, the distant sound of flute, the chirping of night insects all form a soft backdrop. The stories told here are not simple diversions. They are the thread binding the games to the great myths of Greece. For it is said that Olympia itself was founded by heroes, that every contest, every crown, echoes deeds performed by gods and demigods long ago. Stay with me now, because here is a twist worth holding on to. Many believe that Heracles himself had founded the Olympic Games after completing his 12 labors. He is said to have marked out the very stadium with his own steps, declaring it sacred ground. Can you imagine standing in that same place, knowing the very act of measuring its length was woven into myth? The games were not simply games. They were reenactments of divine struggles. Each runner and wrestler thought to echo the labors of heroes. A storyteller begins. His voice is low, but it carries easily in the stillness. He speaks of Pelops, a hero who came to Olympia in a chariot race so dangerous that it would decide not only his fate, but the birth of dynasties. He tells of how Pelops won the race through both cunning and favor, and how from his triumph came the name of the Peloponnesus itself, the great land that cradles Olympia. Children gasp softly, though they know the end. Adults nod, comforted by the familiar tale. It is not the novelty of the myth that matters, but the reassurance of hearing it told again, like a lullaby for the spirit. Every few breaths, let me draw you back, safe, calm, unhurried. These myths are not to unsettle you, but to ease you deeper into the folds of sleep where stories flow like dreams. The myths reach beyond men to the gods themselves. Zeus, whose great altar towers above the games, is said to watch every contest. Some believe thunderclouds gather more often during the Olympics because the sky god wished to remind mortals of his presence. Hera, too, had her place. A temple stood in her honor at Olympia, older even than Zeus's grand temple. And it was here that women held their own festival, the Heraia, racing in honor of the queen of the gods. Even in myths, the games belong not only to men but to the harmony of all. Picture the way a tale unfolds by firelight. Sparks rise, curling upward as the storyteller's hands gesture slowly. His words paint heroes in broad strokes, Heracles straining against impossible tasks, Achilles shining like dawn, Odysseus whispering cleverness into ears of kings. Each figure is both larger than life and deeply familiar, for in their stories the people of Olympia recognize themselves, the struggle, the triumph, the fleetingness of glory. And then the myths become playful. Some tell of satyrs who once danced near the grove, of nymphs who hid in springs, of Pan piping his music to wandering shepherds. These lighter tales weave smiles across tired faces. Children giggle, clutching at their parents, while older listeners lean back, eyes half closed, letting the sounds drift through them like a breeze. The games may have tested strength and speed, but myths reminded everyone that life contained joy and mystery, too. Now let us pause. Imagine yourself there, sitting cross-legged on cool earth, the faint smoke of torches brushing your nose, the warmth of others close by. The storyteller's rhythm slows, like waves meeting sand. You do not need to cling to each detail. The essence is enough. That Olympia was never only a place of contests, but also a stage where gods and mortals shared the same air, the same ground, the same stories whispered into the night. Stay with me, for here is another gentle revelation. In telling myths during the Olympics, the Greeks were not escaping reality. They were deepening it. By linking athletes to heroes, victories to divine favor, they wove meaning into every race and wrestling match. Even the smallest contest carried echoes of something eternal. It was not about who ran fastest, but about what their running meant. An echo of Heracles, a gift of Zeus, a story added to the endless chain of human striving. As night wears on, the crowd thins. The youngest children have fallen asleep in their parents' laps, their dreams already braided with heroes and gods. The storytellers lower their voices, speaking now to the few who linger, their words as soft as embers fading. The myths shift from triumph to lessons, warnings about pride, praise of humility, reminders that even gods respect balance. The olive wreath itself seems to gleam faintly in the stories, a crown not of wealth but of wisdom. And now, gently, imagine lying back beneath the sky. The Milky Way stretches above, like a road of light leading to Olympus itself. The torches gutter, the last story ends, and silence takes its rightful place. But it is not empty silence. It is full, heavy with memory and meaning, like the pause after prayer or the breath between verses of a hymn. You realize that Olympia is not only made of stone and earth, but of myths carried on the wind, stories that linger long after voices fade. Before we leave this chapter, let me reassure you once more. These myths are soft companions, not demands. They remind us that life is more than striving. It is listening, resting, belonging. The games would not have endured for centuries had they been only about speed and strength. They endure because they were wrapped in story, in the warmth of community, in the comfort of hearing again and again that we are part of something greater than ourselves. And so, as the last torch dims, you can drift easily, knowing the myths of the ancient Olympics are not lost. They are here in your thoughts, in the air between us, in the gentle rhythm of words meant to cradle you. In the next chapter, we will move into the daily lives of those who came to Olympia, not athletes or poets, but the ordinary travelers and families, the vendors, the cooks, the children who laughed and played while history was unfolding around them. But for now, let your heart rest with the heroes, your breath steady as the olive leaves stir in the midnight breeze. When dawn returned to Olympia, it often carried with it the hum of ordinary life, soft and unremarkable, yet essential to the great festival. The games may have been the centerpiece, the contests and ceremonies written into stone and memory, but around them swirled a quieter, humbler rhythm. The lives of those who came not to compete, not to judge, not even to compose verses, but simply to live the festival in all its human detail. If you pause with me now, you might hear it. The murmur of merchants arranging goods, the laughter of children chasing each other between tents, the clatter of pots as food is prepared. It is tempting, when thinking of the ancient Olympics, to imagine only the athletes in their glory or the temples in their splendor. But stay with me, because here is a gentle truth. The games could not have existed without the ordinary travelers who made the sacred site into a living city. Olympia itself was not a metropolis. It was more shrine than settlement, more sacred grove than town. Yet, for the days of the festival, it became one of the busiest places in the Greek world. Roads filled with pilgrims from every polis, travelers bearing dialects from distant coasts, farmers who walked for days, families who came simply to watch, to sell, to share. Imagine arriving there, not as a victor, but as one of these thousands of ordinary souls. You might pitch a simple tent among the trees, or, if you were less fortunate, sleep beneath the stars, wrapped in a cloak. The smell of cooking fires would mingle with the scent of dust and olive leaves. Merchants hawked honey cakes, figs, olives preserved in brine. Potters displayed simple cups, etched with scenes of gods or athletes. Leather workers sold sandals, already softened by hands that had shaped them with care. For every victor crowned with olive, there were hundreds of unseen hands that fed, clothed, and sustained the great gathering. Pause with me here. Doesn't this make Olympia feel more alive? Not a marble stage alone, but a pulsing, breathing community, where greatness brushed shoulders with ordinariness, and both were needed. The children of these travelers found their own joy. They were not admitted into the sacred contests, but they raced in the dust outside the stadium, their little feet kicking up clouds, their laughter tumbling over one another. They pretended to be wrestlers, grabbing each other's tunics, falling into heaps of giggles. They played with pebbles, tossing them into lines, or fashioned toys from scraps of wood. To them, Olympia was not only sacred, it was a playground. Their shouts rose like birdsong, lightening the solemn weight of rituals. Mothers sat together, gossiping softly, weaving or repairing garments. Fathers haggled for food or wine, their voices rising and falling in the familiar cadences of bargaining. Travelers brought news from their cities, tales of wars, of harvests, of festivals far away. In this way, Olympia became a place not just of contest but of communication, where stories crossed mountains and seas, weaving a web of connection across the Greek world. And here is a twist you may not expect. Among these ordinary people were not only sellers and families, but also philosophers and thinkers who used the gathering as an opportunity. They set up small gatherings on the edges of the crowds, speaking of virtue, of balance, of the nature of the gods. Listeners gathered not because these talks were part of the festival, but because they, too, were a kind of nourishment. Imagine sitting in the shade of an olive tree, eating a handful of figs, while a philosopher asks, what is the true crown of life? Is it the olive wreath or the peace that comes from wisdom? Such questions turned Olympia into a place of reflection as well as celebration. Now breathe with me. Slow, easy. Picture the clamor of the games. Then picture yourself slipping into the market where clay jars gleam in the sun, where the scent of fresh bread wafts from ovens dug into the earth. Imagine the touch of rough linen against your fingers as you choose cloth, the sound of a lyre strummed softly by a wandering musician hoping for coins. The games themselves lasted only a few days, but for many who came, these smaller moments were the true treasures, remembered long after the victors' names had faded. Stay close, for there is another quiet truth. Not all who came to Olympia were wealthy. Many endured discomfort. Water had to be fetched from the river. Food was scarce by the end of the festival, and sleeping beneath the crowded stars could be restless. Yet they endured it gladly, for to be present was itself an honor. They might never step into the stadium, never stand before Zeus's altar, but they could say, I was there. I breathed the same air as gods and heroes. I saw the crown placed upon the victor's head. As dusk fell each day, the market would glow with torchlight. Merchants continued their selling, their stalls lit by flickering flames. Families gathered to share evening meals. Bread torn and passed, olives bitten slowly, a little wine diluted with water. The sounds of laughter rose, mingled with the chirping of cicadas and the low song of night birds. In these moments, you can feel the intimacy of Olympia not as a grand spectacle, but as a human gathering, fragile and warm, held together by food, fire, and companionship. Think of how these travelers returned home. Some carried trinkets, cups, small statues, scraps of cloth. Others carried only memories. They told stories of the games, not only of who won or lost, but of the taste of honey under a hot sun, of the kindness of a stranger who shared bread, of the sound of a flute at midnight. These were the threads that wove Olympia into the hearts of those who would never see their names inscribed in stone. And now, gently, let us draw the lamp lower. Imagine yourself one of them. You are not an athlete, not a poet, not a judge. You are simply there, part of the great human tide. You sit by the fire, your cloak wrapped around your shoulders, listening to laughter, to a child's sleepy question, to the low murmur of a story being told again. You feel the weight of fatigue, but it is sweet, the kind that comes after a day well lived. The ordinary life of Olympia was never recorded in marble, yet it was no less sacred. Without it, the games would have been hollow. The ordinary gave meaning to the extraordinary, just as sleep gives meaning to waking and rest gives meaning to striving. This is a lesson hidden in the dust and firelight. Greatness is cradled by the everyday. When the last torch burns low, you can feel a hush settle over the camp. Merchants lie beside their goods. Children curl against their parents. The cicadas sing on. Above, the stars shine the same as they did over victors, poets, and philosophers. All are held beneath the same sky, equal in the quiet of night. And you, too, are part of that circle, warmed by the same fire, wrapped in the same timeless story. In the next chapter, we will step gently into the rituals of farewell. The closing of the games, the prayers and farewells, the way Olympia slowly empties, leaving behind silence and memory. But for now, let your breath slow, let the murmurs of ordinary life soothe you, and rest in the knowledge that even the simplest presence can shape the greatest of gatherings. The final day of the games always carried with it a strange mixture of fullness and emptiness, like the lingering sweetness after a feast when the table is nearly bare. Olympia, which only days before had been a living river of voices, footsteps, and songs, now began to quiet. The air was still touched with the smoke of sacrifices and the scent of roasted meat, but beneath it all was something softer, the awareness that this great gathering was drawing to a close. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, a hush between heartbeats, as though the valley itself exhaled. At dawn, the last rituals were prepared. Victors and judges assembled, their faces tired but solemn. The great altar of Zeus, now thick with the ash of countless offerings, loomed in the background, bearing witness to all that had been promised and given. The victors stood not as fierce competitors anymore, but as symbols, their crowns of wild olive fading slightly yet still radiant in the morning light. Beside them, officials announced the names one final time, making sure they would be remembered by all who had come. Stay with me here, because there is a gentle twist. The closing of the games was not a moment of loud triumph. It was marked by simplicity, by ritual that echoed the humility of beginnings. The victors, though celebrated, were reminded of their mortality. They were expected to return home not as conquerors lording over others, but as servants of harmony, as men who had embodied balance and restraint. In this way, the end of the games was not an end at all, but a quiet redirection from glory on the track back to life in the polis. The priests led final prayers to Zeus, Hera, and the other gods of Olympus. Hands were raised skyward, chants spoken in unison. A final libation was poured, wine soaking into the earth, as if to thank the ground itself for carrying so many feet. The sound of flute and drum returned one last time, steady, calming, like a lullaby meant to ease the festival into rest. Now imagine the athletes. Their bodies bore marks of the contests, scratches from wrestling, dust ground into their hair, muscles sore from days of exertion. And yet, beneath the fatigue, there was a glow. They had given their best, whether they had won or lost, and now they stood as part of shared memory. Some smiled faintly, others seemed lost in thought. A young runner might already be wondering about the next games, for years away. An older man might know these were his last. All carried something intangible, a quiet pride that had nothing to do with marble statues or inscriptions, but with having stood in the sacred dust of Olympia. Let's pause here and lower the lamp a little. Can you picture the crowd listening to the final prayers? Families leaning against one another, children half asleep, merchants setting aside their wares, all pausing together. For a moment, everyone is equal again, bound not by victory or wealth, but by the soft silence that follows prayer. And then, slowly the dispersal begins. Camps are taken down, cloaks are folded, baskets packed. Merchants load their remaining goods. Farmers gather their families. The roads that led into Olympia fill once more, but now in the opposite direction. Feet, hooves, and wagon wheels stir up dust as the crowd filters back into the wide world. It is a procession not of triumph, but of return, of rejoining daily life after days of sacred suspension. Stay with me, because here lies another gentle truth. The closing of the games was never abrupt. It was like twilight, lingering, gradual, filled with afterglow. Pilgrims walked slowly, stopping to speak with those they had met, promising to remember names, to send news, to meet again in 4 years. In those farewells, there was something tender. For some, it was a promise kept. For others, a last goodbye. Olympia was not just a place of contest, but a connection. And with every departure, threads of friendship and kinship were carried back across the Greek world. Imagine the athletes returning home. In one city, a victor might be met with a hero's welcome, trumpets sounding, feast prepared. In another, a man who had not won might simply return to his family's embrace, bringing with him stories of what he saw. The beauty of the temples, the majesty of the altar, the kindness of strangers. Both stories mattered. Both were part of the tapestry of the games. The sacred grove itself returned to silence. The fires of the altars dimmed, leaving only faint trails of smoke. The great statue of Zeus remained, watching with calm that belonged to eternity, unbothered by the passage of mortals. The stadium lay empty, its long track marked only by footprints in the dust. The wrestling pit was still, the ropes around it loosened, yet in all this stillness there was no sadness. The silence of Olympia after the games was a fertile silence, the kind that holds memory like seeds in the soil. And in that silence, you may hear something even softer. Perhaps it is the echo of a cheer carried on the wind, or the imagined thud of feet against packed earth, or the murmur of a prayer whispered long ago. The valley kept those sounds, layering them gently across the years, so that even when no one stood there, The game still lived. Let your breath soften with this thought. Endings are never truly endings. The olive crowns would wither. The feast would fade. The names of victors would grow faint with time. But the spirit of Olympia remained. It rested in the memories of those who walked away, and the stories carried to distant coasts, and the promise of another gathering yet to come. As night falls, the valley is quiet once more. Only the stars bear witness now, glittering above the silent stadium, the hushed temples, the sleeping grove. The same stars that shone on Heracles, on the first runners, on poets and priests and children playing in the dust, now shine on the empty field. And in their quiet light, you can sense that Olympia itself is resting, preparing for the cycle to begin again. You may rest, too. Feel the calm of closure, the ease of completion. Let the dispersal of the crowd remind you that nothing need last forever to matter deeply. Let the hush of Olympia after the games soothe you, like the steady rhythm of waves retreating from the shore. The story continues, but for this night, the chapter is gently closed. In the next chapter, we will step into the stories of memory, how the games lived on in songs, in sculptures, in the quiet telling of tales long after the festival ended. But for now, lean into the silence of Olympia's final night and let yourself drift with it into rest. Memory is a strange thing, isn't it? As you and I settle deeper into this soft telling, imagine yourself seated by a small oil lamp, the games now behind us, the valley of Olympia quiet. What lingers after the crowd depart? Not the dust on the roads, nor the fading smell of roasted meat, but the memories, woven, reshaped, carried across the Greek world. The games lived on long after the athletes left the track, not only in official inscriptions or grand statues, but in gentle human recollection, in stories whispered over hearths, in songs murmured by traveling poets. Here is a gentle twist of memory's power. The official record, carved in stone or set in bronze, might list names and victories. Yet what endured more vividly was the way people remembered. A farmer might tell his children about seeing a runner streak, like wind beneath the morning sun. A mother might describe the hush of prayer at Zeus's altar. A poet, wandering from polis to polis, might embellish, making a modest victor seem like a demigod. In this way, the games were never fixed. They lived and breathed in the remembering. Stay with me, because this is where the past becomes alive again. Imagine a family gathered after supper, the lamps low, the children leaning forward as their grandfather tells of the time he walked to Olympia in his youth. He might recall the thunder of feet on the track, or the shine of bronze helmets, or the taste of figs shared with strangers under an olive tree. And though the children were never there, in their minds they walked the sacred grove as if it were their own memory. Memory spreads like that, tenderly, quietly, across time. The poets had a special role. They did not only record victories, they dressed them in beauty. Pindar, for example, composed odes that lifted mortals into near myth with his words. The simple act of winning a race became a reflection of divine favor, a sign that the victor was touched by gods and destiny. Yet even as such poetry glorified, it also soothed. It reminded listeners that they, too, were part of a world where humans and gods met, where even ordinary lives were threads in sacred design. Let's lower the lamp a little more. Picture a sculptor chiseling marble in a workshop, dust drifting in the shafts of sunlight. He is carving not just a likeness of a victor, but the spirit of an entire festival. In the curve of a muscle, the set of a jaw, the hint of olive leaves on a crown, he tries to capture the living memory of Olympia. Centuries later, fragments of such statues still carry whispers of applause, of flute music, of prayers. Memory clings to stone in its own way, and not all memory was grand. Travelers carried smaller stories too, of the journey itself, of friends met along the road, of the sight of the Alpheus River at dawn. A man might tell of a loaf of bread shared with strangers, or of hearing a new dialect sung in the marketplace. These gentle recollections mattered, because they made Olympia not only a sacred place, but a lived one, full of ordinary kindness. Isn't it soothing to think that the greatest festival of the ancient world was remembered not only in triumph, but in small human joys? Every few paragraphs, I like to remind you, breathe slowly here. Imagine your own memories, how some are sharp and detailed, while others blur into feelings. That was how the games endured. The facts may have blurred, but the feelings of awe, of unity, of sacred belonging remained steady, passed from lips to ears like a flame from one lamp to another. There is another curiosity to unfold. Memory of the games was not always consistent. Some remembered them as golden, flawless, a time when gods walked among men. Others recalled them with a tinge of realism. The dust, the crowding, the quarrels. Both memories mattered, because they revealed the truth. The games were not frozen perfection, but living imperfect and beautiful for it. That blend of myth and memory was what allowed the festival to last for centuries, surviving wars, droughts, and the shifting of empires. Let us drift into one such memory, imagined as if through the eyes of a child. The child, now grown, recalls seeing the victors crowned. He remembers how the crowd hushed, how the judge's hand trembled slightly as he placed the olive wreath. He remembers the sunlight catching the leaves, turning them briefly golden. He may not remember the victor's name or the exact words of the herald, but he remembers the feeling, a shiver of awe, as though the whole world paused. That feeling would carry him through years, long after the olive crown had turned to dust. Stay close now, because here comes a softer truth. The memory of the games was not only a human act. The land itself remembered. The stones of the stadium, the groves of wild olive, the banks of the Alpheus, they bore silent witness to each festival, layer upon layer. Even when no one stood upon the track, the earth held the echo of countless footsteps. The wind through the trees carried faint traces of cheers. Nature itself became a keeper of memory, one that asked for no inscription, only silence. And memory was also ritualized. Cities recorded victors in public lists, ensuring their names would echo across time. Families honored ancestors who had once competed, retelling their stories during meals and festivals. In some places, statues of former athletes stood along streets, quiet reminders of glory that once was. These layers of memory, both official and personal, braided together to make the games seem eternal. As the centuries passed, though, memories shifted. What had once been lived became legend. Victors became larger than life, their stories embroidered with details impossible yet captivating. The games themselves began to glow in recollection, shining brighter than they may have been in reality. But isn't that the way memory so often works? We remember not with precision, but with warmth, coloring the past to make it bearable, to make it meaningful. Let's pause again, like setting down a cup gently. Think of how memory comforts. For the Greeks, recalling Olympia was not simply nostalgia. It was reassurance. It told them that despite wars and changes, there was a rhythm, a constancy. Every 4 years, the games returned. And even if one could not attend, remembering that they existed gave a sense of stability, like the steady turning of the seasons. And so memory carried the games into future. Travelers in later centuries, Roman visitors, Christian pilgrims, even modern archaeologists, all of them touched those memories in their own way, layering new interpretations on top of the old. The games of Olympia ceased to exist physically for a time, but in memory, they never died. They lived in stories, in ruins, in the very imagination of humankind. As you breathe slowly now, let this thought cradle you. Memory is a bridge. The Greeks built it not of stone, but of words, gestures, rituals, and recollections. Across that bridge, we can still walk tonight, hearing faint applause, smelling the sweet smoke of sacrifice, feeling the dust underfoot. Memory is enough to make the games alive, even in the quiet of your own room, centuries away. And when the lamp burns low, and we close this chapter, remember, your own memories, too, carry weight. Just as the Greeks cherished their stories of Olympia, so too do your moments, however small, hold meaning. Rest in that comfort, in the knowledge that memory itself is a form of endurance, a way for life to continue long after the moment has passed. When we return in the next chapter, we will step into the songs and poems that preserve the games, the artistry of remembrance. But for now, lean back into the gentle hush of memory's embrace, and let it carry you softly toward rest. The night feels steady, as though the stars themselves have slowed their dance just a little to make room for our wandering thoughts. You and I have already walked together through so many corners of Olympia, its tracks, its temples, its crowds, and its memories. Now, gently, let's draw close to something that might seem quieter, but is in truth a golden thread that bound the festival together. Tonight, I'd like us to rest within the idea of music and poetry at the Olympic Games. We often picture athletes in motion, thus rising, muscles taut, a foot stretching toward the finish line. But did you know the Games once gave equal space to singers, poets, and those who could paint images with words? Stay with me, because in this chapter we'll let those voices echo again, softer than a breeze over the olive groves, yet strong enough to last for centuries. It is said that in the earliest gatherings at Olympia, before the contest had expanded to days upon days of physical events, poets like Homer and Hesiod might have performed to audiences who leaned forward, catching each turn of phrase. This may sound surprising. How can one compare a chariot race to the recitation of verses? But in that ancient world, poetry was not entertainment set apart. It was memory, history, sacred ritual, and emotional truth all braided together. Without written programs, the words of the skilled poet carried the story of the games to those who weren't there. Imagine the hush that might have fallen on a crowd, hundreds who had cheered moments before, now settling into stillness as a poet stepped forward, his voice weaving the deeds of heroes and the will of the gods. Let's pause with that picture. Close your eyes for a moment and breathe. In the distance, you hear the echoes of athletes, but nearby the cadence of a voice rises and falls. Stay with me. We'll explore why poetry mattered so much, and in a moment you'll see how it gave immortality not only to the winners but to the festival itself. For now, let's allow ourselves to lean into the feeling of being held by language, something familiar to us even across thousands of years. One of the most celebrated poets connected with the Olympics was Pindar, who lived centuries after the earliest games but dedicated himself to immortalizing victories in verse. His odes were not casual compositions. They were complex, sung aloud with music, each syllable chosen to honor the athlete, while tying their achievement to a grander tapestry of myth. Pindar might tell of a runner, but within his telling, the runner became part of a lineage stretching back to Hercules himself. Do you see the twist? A simple mortal effort became sacred through song. That was the power of music and poetry at Olympia. They transformed fleeting exertion into something lasting, resonant, eternal. And yet, even before Pindar, Olympia itself had always been full of sound. The shrill call of flutes urged wrestlers forward. Lyres were strummed by wandering musicians in the encampments where visitors set up tents. If you imagine Olympia only as dusty arenas, you miss the chorus of life that surrounded it. The clapping of hands, the chanting of processions, the laughter at night by firelight, the soft hum of strings carried on the evening breeze. These sounds wrapped the games in a sense of festival, reminding every visitor that Olympia was as much about celebration and unity as it was about contest. Take another breath. We've been walking slowly through the soundscape of the games, and I want you to notice how natural it feels. In your own life, you may recall that music has a way of fixing memory, anchoring experiences that might otherwise slip away. The ancients felt the same. Their verses worked like vessels, carrying victories safely across time. Without them, so many names and deeds would have faded into dust. But thanks to their words, we still hear faint echoes, even tonight, beneath our blanket of stars. In a way, poetry became a bridge. Think of it. Athletes strained to outpace rivals in physical contests, but poets competed with the swiftness of memory. Which achievement would last longer, the fastest sprint or the song sung about it? Sometimes it was the second that endured more fully. That gentle twist reminds us that the games were never about brawn alone. They were about spirit, art, and remembrance, woven together so tightly you cannot pull one thread without unraveling the rest. Let me draw you deeper into this idea. Picture yourself not as a modern listener, but as a traveler who has journeyed for days to Olympia. Your feet ache, yet your spirit is light because you arrive at the heart of something vast. The races are done for the afternoon, and crowd, restless, gathers in a shaded clearing. A herald announces a poet who will recite. He begins slowly, his words carrying names of victors you may have glimpsed earlier that day. The rhythm lulls you, almost like the sway of branches in the breeze. Your body stills, your mind drifts, and yet each phrase plants itself in you, so that later, When you return to your home far away, you will repeat these lines to your neighbors, and the victories will live again. Isn't it beautiful? This act of remembrance through art. The poet ensured that Olympia was never only for those present. It was for everyone who heard the song afterward. Stay with me just a little longer, because here lies another layer. Music and poetry were offerings, not merely performances. Victors often commissioned odes as a kind of dedication to the gods, particularly to Zeus. A win was not a solitary triumph. It was a gift of the divine, and the ode made that gift tangible. Imagine the humble pride of a wrestler listening to his name carried upward in melody, knowing it would reach not only the ears of his peers, but the heavens themselves. That quiet joy, that reverent acknowledgement, must have been sweeter than any wreath of olive. In time, Olympia became a place where artistic contests sometimes ran parallel to athletic ones. While records are scarce and scholars still debate their scope, we know that competitions in poetry, music, and even storytelling occasionally accompany the festival. This may feel surprising if you picture only sports, but if you think of Olympia as a great celebration of human excellence, it feels natural. Excellence has many forms, and the ancients valued harmony of body and mind. To them, a well-spoken line of verse could be as impressive as a perfectly thrown discus. You might be wondering, why has this quieter side of the games been less remembered? The answer is partly simple. Athletes left behind physical markers, stadiums, broken statues, and stories told by chroniclers. Poets left words, fragile as breath, easily lost unless copied again and again. Many verses dissolved with time, but enough remained to remind us that Olympia rang with more than cheers. It pulsed with music, and it cherished words like treasures. Breathe slowly now, and notice how soothing it feels to imagine those evenings. The sun had dipped behind the hills. Torches lit paths through the groves, and musicians plucked their strings while poets spoke of gods and heroes. The scent of roasted food mingled with smoke from the fires. The air buzzed with gentle excitement, but also peace. Travelers leaned against tree trunks. Friends shared wine, and strangers found themselves united by rhythm and rhyme. Olympia was alive, but also deeply calm, because art has that way of smoothing the edges of even the most raucous day. As we near the close of this chapter, I want you to keep one thought in your pocket. The Olympics, as we remember them, may seem like contests of strength and speed, but the ancients remembered them through song. Their poetry gave shape to memory. Their music lifted spirit into air. Without these, Olympia would have been fleeting. With them, it became eternal. That's why tonight we linger not at the finish line, but in the hush after, when words carried victories further than feet ever could. And now, gently, we'll let the sounds fade. The lyres rest in their cases, the poets bow their heads, and the crowd drifts toward sleep. You and I will rest, too, though tomorrow another chapter awaits us, one where we will explore the rituals of sacrifice and the meaning of offerings at Olympia. For now, though, let the music linger like a lullaby in your chest. You are safe, you are warm, and you are held in the same calm rhythm that soothed ancient hearts. The evening deepens, and the air seems softer now, as though time itself has slowed its steps. You and I have followed the runners, the poets, the chariots, and the crowds, yet there is still more to uncover. Tonight, let's drift together into the quiet heart of ritual, the sacrifices and offerings that lay at the center of the Olympic festival. This may sound solemn, but it was also gentle in its rhythm, full of scents, songs, and moments of shared reverence. If the athletes were the body of the games, then ritual was its breath. Without it, all else would have felt incomplete. At first glance, you might imagine Olympia as a place of contest alone, but every race, every feat of strength, unfolded in the shadow of the altar to Zeus. The sanctuary itself was not merely a sports ground, but a sacred grove where the gods were honored before any humans celebrated. Picture the great ash altar at the center, rising high after centuries of sacrifices. Its surface built not of carved stone, but of packed ash and bone left from offerings that had been burned year after year. This altar was not just a marker. It was a living monument of devotion, layered with the smoke and prayers of generations. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how even the smallest ritual tied together athletes and gods, strangers and friends, mortals and eternity. In the early morning before the competitions, Priests prepared animals for sacrifice. The most common were sheep, but bulls too, when the occasion demanded grandeur. It might sound strange to us, but to them, this was an offering of life back to the divine source of life. It was not done carelessly. Every gesture followed tradition. A libation of wine might be poured first, the forehead of the animal sprinkled with barley, a quiet prayer whispered. Then, after the offering, portions of meat were cooked and shared, turning what began as sacrifice into communal meal. This was a gentle twist. Sacrifice was not destruction alone. It was also nourishment, fellowship, and blessing. Imagine yourself among the crowd. The air carries a mingled scent of roasting meat and resinous smoke from pine torches. A priest chants in measured tones. The sound is low, almost like a hum of bees, steady, unbroken. Around you, people stand with heads bowed, yet their faces glow in firelight. They are not fearful. They are united. You feel the warmth of shoulders close to yours, the hush of voices waiting, the sense of something larger than the sum of its parts. As you breathe, you realize that this is what gave the games their true center. The race is thrilled, but the sacrifice is grounded. Every victor, too, participated in ritual. After receiving his olive wreath, he might dedicate it to Zeus, laying it upon an altar. Some commissioned small statues, not of themselves but the god who had granted them strength. Even these statues were offerings, not trophies. They whispered humility. This was not only my doing, it was a favor of heaven. That gentle acknowledgement carried weight. Imagine walking the sacred precinct and seeing row upon row of these dedications, each one carrying a story, each one a gift of gratitude. Take a slow breath. In your mind, watch the smoke spiral upward, twisting like a ribbon into the evening sky. The ancients believed it carried prayers, as though words could ride the air and find the ears of Zeus. Even if you do not share their faith, you can feel the beauty in the gesture. It was about connection, the human hand reaching upward, the divine presence bending down, and between them the fragile, glowing column of smoke. There were other offerings too, less dramatic but equally meaningful. Visitors brought small clay figurines, carved vessels, or inscribed tablets. These items filled the treasuries at Olympia, little chambers built by city-states to house the gifts their citizens left behind. Each treasury stood like a promise, a city's devotion carved in marble, its wealth given not for conquest but for reverence. When travelers walked through Olympia, they saw not only athletes but the generosity of entire peoples displayed in stone and bronze. Stay with me now, because there is something quietly moving in this. The Olympics were not just contests between individuals. They were gatherings of communities. Sacrifices and offerings reminded every person that they were part of a tapestry larger than themselves. The games would end, athletes would grow old, but the altar, the treasuries, and the smoky air remained. They whispered continuity, the sense that life was fleeting but devotion could endure. Even music played a role here. Hymns accompanied sacrifices, the sound of flutes mingling with chants. Think of how it must have felt. The rising sun casting long shadows, the smell of incense curling through the air, voices rising together in slow rhythm. The moment was sacred, but not frightening. It was peaceful, as if the world itself was exhaling. That softness is easy to miss when we read about rituals. But if you imagine yourself standing there, you sense that calm washing over you. And in the evenings, when contests were done, more sacrifices were offered in gratitude. Victors gave thanks not only for strength, but for safety, for the chance to compete, and to return home. In a world where travel was perilous and health uncertain, surviving to stand in Olympia was itself a blessing. Their offerings were tokens of relief, as if to say, we are grateful we arrived, and grateful we will depart in peace. That humility is worth remembering even now. Let's turn the lamp a little lower in our minds. Picture the grove at night. Torches flickering, shadows stretching across the stones, priests moving slowly in robes of white. The crowd gathers in near silence, the only sound crackle of fire and the soft murmur of prayers. Someone beside you hums a line of a hymn, and without planning it, you hum too. Suddenly, you are not alone. You are part of the great breathing whole. The ritual has wrapped you into it, as it wrapped every soul who came to Olympia. Pause with that. Let the thought settle. These sacrifices, these offerings, were not interruptions to the games. They were the heart of them. Without them, there would have been races but no sacredness, victories but no memory, gatherings but no unity. With them, every moment glowed with meaning. As our chapter draws to a close, carry this with you. The games lived because they were more than sport. They were woven with ritual, smoke, song, and shared meals that bound gods and mortals together. You may not stand at that ancient altar yourself, but tonight, under the quiet rhythm of my words, you can feel its warmth. It was never about fear. It was always about belonging, gratitude, and the soft hope that some part of us can reach upward and be received. And now, as the smoke fades and the torches burn low, let's rest. Tomorrow, we'll continue our wandering to explore the artistry of Olympia, the statues, the carvings, and the ways beauty was made to last. But tonight, let the thought of the altar stay with you. Steady, glowing, timeless. You are safe. You are calm. You are part of a tradition of remembrance that stretches back across millennia. Rest in that thought, and let sleep carry you onward. The night is long and quiet, and our journey through Olympia is nearly complete. Yet one more path waits for us to follow. We have stood among the athletes, breathed the dust of the stadium, listened to hymns, and watched smoke rise from the sacred altar. But tonight, let us linger with the stories told not in races or rituals, but in stone and bronze. Olympia was as much a sanctuary of art as it was a competition, and every statue, every carving, was another voice in the chorus of memory. The games might have lasted for days, but these works of beauty were meant to last for centuries, and they did. As you and I walk softly through this imagined grove, you may expect the silence of night. Yet listen closer, and you hear a different rhythm, the stillness of statues. They do not speak with words, but their very forms whisper devotion, triumph, and reverence. Picture the great statue of Zeus once housed in the temple, one of the wonders of the ancient world, towering, radiant. Seated upon his throne, he was said to stretch so high that his head nearly brushed the ceiling. His face shone with ivory and gold, his robes gleamed, his eyes seemed alive. The ancients who entered this temple described not awe and fear, but awe and calm, as though they had stepped into the presence of eternity itself. That was the power of art. It quieted the mind and lifted it at the same time. Stay with me now, because here lies the soft twist. Many imagine the Olympics only as contests of physical might, yet they were also contests of artistry. Sculptors, poets, and craftsmen came to Olympia not to race, but to show skill. Their work decorated the sanctuary, and though their names are often forgotten, their creations endured. Victors dedicated statues of themselves, yes, but not in arrogance alone. These were not grand portraits as we imagine today, but idealized forms meant to honor the gods. A runner, carved in marble, stood forever in the moment of calm before motion, muscles at rest, eyes lifted, not proud but serene. Each statue was a prayer made visible. Imagine wandering between rows of such figures. Moonlight spills across polished stone. Shadows lean against the ground. You feel a kind of still companionship, as though each figure watches without judgment, bearing witness to every soul who passes. Some statues are large, heroic in scale, others small and delicate, tucked away like secrets. Together, they created an outdoor gallery unlike any in the world. Even now, when we find fragments of them, chipped torsos or weathered heads, they carry the quiet dignity of their time. Every carving told a story. Pediment of temples showed mythic scenes, gods battling giants, heroes enduring trials. These were not idle decorations, but teachings carved in stone. A young athlete walking past might lift his gaze and see not just his own reflection in the polished marble, but the saga of Heracles or the wisdom of Athena. It reminded him that his own efforts were part of a longer thread. That thread tied myth, art, and life into one weave. Pause here with me, and imagine yourself reaching out your hand to trace a groove in the stone, the mark a sculptor's chisel made centuries before. You can almost hear the tap, tap, tap of his tool as he shaped the marble. Perhaps he worked in the heat of summer, his brow damp, his focus steady. He did not know who would see it centuries later, yet he trusted that beauty had its own endurance. That faith is its own kind of offering. Even bronze spoke. Many statues were cast not in stone, but in gleaming metal. When the sun struck them, they glowed like fire, alive with light. Picture a bronze discus thrower, arm drawn back, his whole form caught an eternal pause before release. He never moved, yet the suggestion of motion filled the air around him. Viewers stood silently before such figures, their breath slowing, their hearts steadying. That is the power of stillness. It teaches us to listen to time itself. Do you see now why Olympia was more than races? The sanctuary was alive with these works, each one a dialogue between mortal and divine. The games honored Zeus, but art gave shape to that honor. And in this balance, something remarkable was born, a place where beauty and strength stood side by side. Let's lower the lamp again in our thoughts. The stadium is empty now. The altar smoke has drifted away, but the statues remain bathed in silver light. Their shadows fall across the pathways, long and gentle. As you walk among them, you realize you are moving not only through stone but through memory. Each figure holds a moment, frozen but not lost. This is how art becomes time companion. It preserves the fleeting in a form that endures. And there is something soothing in knowing that. We so often think of victory as passing, joy as brief. But here in Olympia, joy was carved into stone, gratitude cast into bronze. These offerings outlive their makers, and even now, fragments reach us across the centuries. Imagine how comforting it must have been for those ancient visitors to know that their lives, their devotions, would not vanish into air, but remain visible in form. Stay with me a little longer. There is another dimension to this. The artists themselves competed. Prizes were not only for runners, but also for poets and sculptors, though history remembers the athletes more vividly. Think of the courage it took to display a work of art before so many, knowing it will be judged as fiercely as any race. That courage, too, was honored at Olympia. It reminds us that the games were never solely about the body. They were about the whole human spirit. Mind, body, creativity, devotion. As our chapter drifts toward its close, let your breath grow steady. Feel the cool marble beneath your fingertips, the warmth of bronze that has held the sun. Let the silent figures keep you company in this imagined walk. They do not hurry. They do not speak, yet they comfort. They tell you, softly, that beauty lasts, that devotion endures, and that even in the rush of contests and crowds, stillness has a place. And now, as the statues fade back into shadow, know that we are nearing the final step of our journey. One more chapter remains. It will carry us gently out of Olympia, into reflection, into quiet departure. But before that, rest a moment longer in this gallery of memory. The statues will keep their vigil as you drift into calm. You are safe. You are unhurried. You are part of the same enduring thread. The night has deepened now, and the lamps of memory flicker softly, as if they too are ready for rest. We have wandered far, you and I, through races, rituals, altars, feasts, and stories of stone. The games have unfolded before us not as noise or contest, but as a gentle current, carrying us across centuries. And now, in this final chapter, we step away from Olympia itself, and yet we do not leave behind. For the truth is, the games never truly ended. They lived on in echoes, in whispers, in dreams that reached long beyond their time. Imagine with me the sanctuary after the last visitor has gone. Dust settles, the air is still, the statues keep their watch. There will come years when crowds no longer gather, when the torch is not lit, when silence stretches across the empty fields. Yet silence is not absence. Even when the races ended in history, their memory continued, woven into stories told by poets, carried by travelers, and whispered in villages far from Greece. The games became a memory that refused to fade, like the faint glow of embers long after the fire. Stay close here, because the gentle twist is this. What the ancients built was not simply an event, but an idea. The idea of gathering, of honoring the divine through human effort, of finding unity in shared devotion. That idea proved stronger than stone, stronger even than time. When later generations revived the Olympics in new forms, they did not invent something entirely new. They reached back to these ancient nights, and in their own way, they kept the embers alive. Think of that for a moment. The modern world, with all its distances and changes, still pauses every few years to watch athletes gather. And though the languages, the places, The customs have changed. The root is the same as it was under the olive trees of Olympia, to celebrate what humans can do, and to offer that celebration in the spirit of peace. In this way, the games became not just Greek, but human. They belong not to one time, but to all time. As we breathe slowly together now, I want you to feel that continuity. Imagine a runner in the 5th century BCE tying the leather strap of his sandal, his heart calm before the race. Now picture an athlete today lacing her shoes, steadying her breath before stepping onto the track. Across thousands of years, their gestures mirror one another. Different worlds, same pulse. This is what makes memory more than recollection. It becomes presence. The past does not vanish. It flows quietly into the present. Pause with me here. The sanctuary is empty, yes, but it is not forgotten. The statues are weathered. The temples are ruins, yet the essence remains. Even as stones crumble, the stories remain whole. That is the gift of time. It carries forward what matters most, and it leaves behind what we no longer need. In that way, history is like sleep itself, letting go, while also holding gently to the dreams worth keeping. And so, in this last chapter, we let Olympia rest. We leave the stadium where the dust is settled. We leave the altar where the smoke has faded. We leave the echoes of cheers and hymns. Yet we do so without sadness, because we know that nothing is lost. Every race run, every hymn sung, every statue carved, remains part of a thread that stretches from then to now, and onward still. Let your body soften as you imagine this thread. It weaves through the olive groves. It glimmers in the torchlight. It lies beneath the stars. It ties you to those who walked before, and it ties them to you. That is the quiet secret of the games. They were never only about winning. They were about belonging to a time, to a people, to something greater than oneself. And that belonging has never left. As your breath evens out, imagine the last lamp at Olympia being extinguished. Darkness covers the sanctuary, but the stars above remain bright. They shine as they did then, as they do now. The stars are the truest spectators, the ones who never left the games. Every runner, every artist, every pilgrim lifted their eyes to the same night sky you see tonight. And in that starlight, they found reassurance. You can find it too. Stay with me just a little longer before we drift into the silence beyond. The games began as offerings to Zeus, but they ended as offerings to all of us. They taught that strength could be paired with grace, that competition could live alongside peace, that devotion could find form not only in temples, but in the everyday gestures of effort and care. These lessons do not belong to history alone. They belong to you as you rest now, in the safety of the present. And now, gently we taper into quiet. The journey is complete. The story has been told. The sanctuary rests in memory, and you rest too. If sleep has already come, then let it hold you softly. If you are still listening, know that you are safe, that you are unhurried, that the thread of history keeps you company. The games will wait for you, always, in memory's grove, under the stars. So let us close with gratitude. Gratitude for the ancients who gathered, for the artists who carved, for the poets who sang. Gratitude to the athletes who ran, and for the quiet flame that still flickers in the world today. Gratitude for this moment of stillness, where we have shared the story together. And with that, the lamp is lowered, the blanket pulled close, the rain beyond the window steady. The games have ended, the sanctuary is quiet, and you are carried now into the softest of sleeps. May you drift as peacefully as the torch smoke rising into the night. And when you wake, the story will still be here, ready to begin again if you wish.